Road to Salvation. Darkness Prevails, Book 3. By Sierra Graves. Chapter 1. Aiden. I frowned and tried to open my eyes, but they were too heavy. A weight resided on my chest, and when I attempted to shift, pain immediately followed. I gave up and continued to eavesdrop on Iona and Henson, arguing. Boots stomped across a hardwood floor, and Henson cursed quietly. "Will you stop pacing, Iona? He's going to live, according to the healer." "I can't sit still. Not right now. You've been up for 5 days. Drag a cot over, and get some damned rest before you die from exhaustion. You really think Aiden wants to come to just so I can tell him that you're ready to keel over yourself?" She scoffed. "We both know I'm already dying. So what if I speed up the process? You don't have to be here. You know that, right? Someone has to keep an eye on you." "I don't need a babysitter," Iona snapped, and her anger pulsed around me. "I know you and Jake have been talking behind my back. I'm not losing it. I'm not about to run off to kill Vencal. Just get out of here, and stop staring at me like I'm going to self-combust. With your luck, you just might." The silence stretched on between them, and I drifted back to sleep, or started to, until Henson's low voice rumbled again. I didn't catch what he said, but whatever it was pissed Iona off even more. "Leave it, Henson. You need more eye drops, and from the way Jake was talking to you last night, your hearing is getting worse." Henson sighed. I fought in vain to open my damned eyes, move my hand, something. Why was it so hard to simply move? What happened to me? Henson continued. "The venom inside you isn't going to take a holiday just because Aiden's starting to recover. Stay on top of it." "Or what?" Iona asked harshly. "You know damned well what. Vencal will win. Is that what you want? For him to steal another man you care about? And then you? Can we talk about something else, please? Like how we've been here for almost a week, and their highnesses have yet to meet with us to talk about anything. And all this time, more goblins are being rounded up by Mariana and Rayson in order to be forced into their damned army." There was another long stretch of silence, then a rush of steps. "I'm going to speak to them. They said they would summon us when they were ready. If you go out there looking like that, they'll throw you in the cells." "Right. Probably cells made of sunshine and freaking rainbows." My lips twitched in a smile, and then a familiar hand was squeezing mine. I squeezed back as hard as I could, and Iona's lips pressed against my forehead. I longed to see her face, and wondered why I was even in such a state of pain and hovering between consciousness and passing out. "Rest, Aiden," Iona said quietly. "You're not fully healed yet." "Healed?" The word came out like a croak, and this time when I tried to open my eyes, they did. Iona's worried face looked back at me. Behind her stood Henson. He nodded to me, then stepped out of the room. "Iona, where are we?" Her face was bruised, but they were fading. She wore long sleeves and black pants, preventing me from seeing what other injuries she might have. Her smile was sad as she sank onto the edge of the bed. "We're safe, that's all that matters right now." "The facility," I murmured, but she shushed me gently. "Sleep, Aiden. We'll talk about it later." She kissed my forehead, and my eyes slipped closed. A rush of images shot through my mind, but then they were gone, and I drifted away into the shadows once again. I stood in a room with white walls and a white tile floor. Computers beeped around me, and the air was stale, like I was underground. The windows told me I wasn't, but the entire atmosphere was strange. Bit by bit, desks and tables materialized around me. I staggered back when the dead body of a fly shimmered into view at my feet. Then another and another. What is this place? I spun around, looking for more. They were scattered about. Blood pooled beneath their bodies, and most looked back at me, eyes filled with fear or confusion. When I found myself facing forward again, Iona was there, but her back was to me. "Iona, where are we?" I walked toward her with my hand outstretched. "Iona." Had she gone deaf again? As my hand was about to land on her shoulder, she disappeared as if she hadn't even been there. I paused and glanced around, frantic to find her. The lights flickered, and when they became stable again, there she was, across the room from me. Her back was to the far wall. A figure appeared through a set of metal double doors. A figure dressed all in white. Vencal. He winked at me as a dagger appeared in his hand. He took off at a run for Iona. Her back was turned. Iona. I sprinted after him, praying I'd get there in time. I shouted her name repeatedly, but she couldn't hear me. Vencal was nearly on her when I threw myself between them. The knife meant for her plunged into my chest. I gasped at the agony exploding inside me. Vencal cackled as he let go of the blade, then vanished. I struggled to keep breathing and stumbled into Iona. I grabbed for the blade, her name on my lips. Her eyes were solid white. She tilted her head, as if straining to hear me. When I grabbed her hand, she flinched and pulled away. The blade that had protruded from my chest was suddenly gone. I ran my hands over myself all the same, searching for a wound. There was none. I'd been stabbed. I knew I'd been stabbed. Aiden, Iona whispered. I whipped my head up to see black blood oozing from her mouth, her ears, and her eyes. She choked on it, gave way to darkness and fog. I caught her as she fell forward and held her as we hit the ground. Her eyes grew wide, and then her body went completely still. No. I shook her, but her limp arm simply fell to the ground and stayed there. Iona. Open your eyes, damn it. You're not dead. You can't be dead. I shouted and ranted, begging for her to take a breath. But she never did. I hugged her lifeless body close and waited for the darkness to consume me too. Laughter pulled my gaze up as Vencal's figure appeared through the fog. He held another dagger in his hand, this one dripping a lime-green viscous substance I knew had to be Reaper venom. You're next, healer, he warned, then charged forward. I threw my arm up to try and stop him when another hand grabbed me. Aiden, wake up, a harsh voice snapped. Aiden. My eyes shot open, and I sucked in a painful breath. Jig had hold of my upper arms. What? Vencal, he was here. I searched behind him, but aside from a broad-shouldered fire warrior, there was no one there. Nightmare. I'd say so. You were shouting pretty loud. He let me go and eyed my chest worriedly. How's that wound feeling? Wound? I glanced down and gingerly touched the bandages wrapped around my chest. Do you not remember anything? I peeled back the bandaging and found a set of stitches, pulling my skin tightly together. Stabbed, I whispered. I was stabbed by Vencal. His wicked grin as he plunged the dagger into my chest flashed in my mind. I flinched and quickly covered the wound. He hadn't been aiming for me. He'd been going for Iona, and I got in the way. Damn. She had to be pissed at me. You were. You're lucky we made it to Brier as fast as we did. Brier? Why are we in the Light-Fi Kingdom? What about the farm? Jig's brows drew together and his eyes darkened. You don't need to know about that yet. You need to keep resting so the healer's tonic will work. I'm well enough. The farm, Jake, why aren't we there? He shook his head and started for the door. I grabbed his arm. He could have easily torn himself free, but he stopped. Don't burden yourself just yet. Where's Iona? Tending to matters involving our current predicament. She was arguing with Henson earlier. Can she see? Has the venom gotten worse? That's not something I'm willing to discuss with you, he replied, and gently pried my arm off. If you want to know how Iona's doing, you'll have to ask her yourself. Grimacing when the stitches tugged, I stood and searched for my shirt. There was nothing in the room aside from the bed I'd been sleeping on, an end table, lamp, and a chair in the far corner. The walls were painted a happy shade of sky blue, and there was a double window with white curtains. It was late evening, judging by the fading light outside. The floor beneath my bare feet was a warm shade of mahogany. I'd been to the Light Fi Kingdom several times, but never stayed in a place as nice as this. Where in Brier are we exactly? I asked Jig as I continued to search for a shirt. Capital. In one of the royal chateaus. We're currently guests of Princess Willow, he replied. What are you looking for? A shirt. Probably shouldn't walk around without one, especially if we're guests of the princess. We're staying in her home, he added with an arched brow. You really should stay here a bit longer. We're at her chateau. Why? Iona. He said it like that should answer all my questions. Instead, it created more. He told me to stay put, and he'd find me a shirt if I was so determined to hunt down Iona. He wasn't gone more than 5 minutes, but my mind shot off in all different directions in his absence. How had we gotten to the kingdom of Brier? Where were Teresa and Matilda? Or the rest of the goblins I'd been looking after on the farm? By the time Jig returned with a black t-shirt in hand, I was anxious to find Iona and have her explain to me what I missed these last. Wait, how many days had I been out? How long have we been here? I asked Jig as I walked toward the door. A week. My hand hovered on the doorknob. I'd be an idiot to think a lot hadn't occurred in that amount of time, not with the way events had been playing out recently. I opened the door and stepped into a brightly lit hallway. Jig was behind me. Each step sent a jarring pain through my right side, and I held my hand to the chest wound I'd suffered at the hands of Vencal. Knowing I stopped him from killing Iona was probably the only thing that kept me pushing forward. At the end of the hall, I stopped and glanced left, then right. Which way? I asked Jig as he stepped up beside me. You sure you want to find Iona? I waited for him to give in. Turn right. I turned, and eventually came to a set of gilded double doors guarded by 2 Fi men. They weren't wearing armor, not like the guards wore in the Dark Fi Kingdoms. They wore all white, and the sight of it made my blood turn cold until I reminded myself neither one was Vencal. They weren't armed. I wondered what good they would be at guarding the princess. I could have been there to kill her, and they wouldn't be able to do a damn thing to stop me. Aiden? Jig asked quietly. Do you need to sit down? No, why? You're pale. I pressed a hand to my chest and shook my head. It wasn't my wound bothering me. It was the thought that just raced through my mind, like it was natural for me to imagine an assassination attempt on a royal. I never used to wonder about any sort of danger, aside from a breakout of the pox or a broken limb. Everything about my life these past few months has become dark and full of peril. I told myself a long time ago I'd never get wrapped up in any politics. Now here I was getting myself stabbed because I let myself fall for a half-Fi, half-goblin warrior. Jarek. Why did it feel like the late king knew what he was doing this whole time? Is Iona in there? I asked the guards after I got a hold of myself. She is, the one on the right answered. Great, let me in. Iona is speaking with Princess Willow and her council, the guard informed me. They are not to be interrupted. I stepped closer. You'll open those doors and let me in. The guard stiffened, his hand twitching to his hip where there was indeed the smallest of daggers. I smirked. After facing down Vencal twice now, plus the radicals that nearly killed Iona, a tiny blade did nothing to deter me. I took another step nearer. Now would be nice, I said. The guard glanced at his companion. He shrugged, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Whatever they saw on my face convinced them to step to the side and open the doors. I think Iona's rubbing off on you, Jig commented as the doors swung inward silently. Is that a good thing? I'm not sure yet. He motioned for me to lead the way, and I stepped into the room. The ceiling was non-existent, or at least it appeared to be so. The capital of Brier was located somewhere on the coastline in northern Oregon. It was winter here, just like everywhere else, but the ceiling was an illusion, showing a bright sunny day. Candles hovered in the air, lighting the rest of the area, though they weren't needed. The light Phi always had a flair for the dramatics. Silk drapes of violet and blue hung from stone columns that formed the perimeter. Paintings of long-gone Phi kings and queens filled the spaces in between. Windows glimmered with the light of the setting sun outside. The stained glass cast rainbows of colors across the hardwood floor. A long rectangular table sat at the front of the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs. Several Phi of varying ages sat around it, their hair ranging from the deepest red to salt and pepper to white blonde. Most appeared intrigued by the speaker, but none of them had such a fierce look of concentration on their faces as Princess Willow. The princess was, by all accounts, a magnificent woman to look upon. Her long curly red hair flowed delicately over her shoulders. The green of her gown brought out the same shade in her irises, which were fixated on the other incredible woman, standing at the opposite end of the table with her back to me. Iona. Whereas Willow wore light colors and gave off an air of compassion, Iona wore all black and seemed to have the weight of the entire Phi world on her shoulders. The very set to her stance said she'd been through hell and survived. There was a fierceness that radiated off every inch of her. Willow, to my eyes, was still an innocent, which was probably why Iona sounded so aggravated with her. None of the Phi seemed to care that Jig and I had joined their session. They didn't even glance our way as we approached the table. There were more Phi here than just those seated. Their finery and silks told me they must be the nobles of the court. Where the king and queen were, I wasn't too sure. Then again, I was fuzzy on the details of how we landed ourselves here to begin with. "You're not listening to me," Iona snapped, her hands curled around the edge of the table. "I think we've all heard you well enough," Willow replied, her voice light and fluttery. "You wish us to engage in a war with the Dark Phi Kingdoms. A war that would cost thousands of innocent lives. A war that is also, to my knowledge, not needed." "They are going to attack you," Iona said louder. "All the Light Phi Kingdoms." "Yes, with their army of enslaved goblins," a Phi with silver hair spoke up, a slight laugh to his words as if he didn't believe anything Iona said. "We have never been close allies with the Dark Phi, but a war. And these rumors you're spreading that they're mistreating the goblins are false. I've just come from Charus, where they created a plague to wipe out the weak." Iona stood to her full height, which wasn't much, but the air in the room grew tense. "I've seen the guards rounding up innocent goblins of all ages and taking them away. Perhaps they're merely taking them somewhere safe until this sickness, which I'm certain Queen Mariana did not create, can be taken care of," another Phi said. "Honestly, who are you to say such things about your own monarch?" "I was head guard for King Jarek," she said quietly. I had a moment to be shocked no one here realized who Iona was, or that she was currently wanted in Charus. It appeared they didn't pay any attention at all to what happened in the Dark Phi Kingdoms. I was there when he was murdered by an assassin brought to Charus by Mariana. Gasps erupted up and down the table as well as around the room. Willow held up her hand, and they fell silent. "You're accusing Queen Mariana of murder?" "I'm accusing her of a lot, if you'd take the time to actually listen." "How dare you speak to our princess in such a manner?" the silver-haired Phi shouted as he stood. "We have offered you shelter out of the kindness of our hearts, but we can just as easily take it away." Iona's shoulders shook. Her laughter was dark and filled with disgust. "You sit here in your pretty halls and think war will never come to your lands. You're idiots, all of you, but your princess is the worst." Willow's jaw dropped. "You will not say such things to me." "Why not? Am I offending your sensitive nature?" Iona laughed louder as she stalked around the table. "Do you have any idea what I've seen since Jarek was killed? Do you?" "No, but surely what you are accusing the queen of is untrue." "Why would I lie?" Iona asked as she stepped closer, causing the princess to shift uncomfortably in her chair. Two guards stepped forward, but they weren't enough to make Iona stop her approach. "Why would I lie about a monarch hell-bent on building an army with goblins? Their blood runs in the streets. Their dead lie where they fell. Whole communities are being wiped off the map. And you think I'm making all of it up? To what end, princess? I wouldn't know, she whispered. Your kind are being slaughtered in droves, and you're going to sit there and do nothing? The Dark Fae will not attack us, the same silver-haired Fae said firmly. We have a treaty. That Mariana will break as soon as her army is strong enough. Tell me, Iona said as she turned back to Willow, what of the king and queen of Jolian? Do they still live? Willow appeared lost as she nervously glanced at her advisors. The king and queen just celebrated the wedding of their son Rayson to Mariana. The woman who spoke wrung her hands as she said it. But I'm afraid there was a terrible fire at the palace 2 nights ago. The king and queen of Jolian were killed, leaving Rayson to take control. Iona was less than a yard from Willow. Jolian is not known for its kindness toward goblins. Now Rayson is married to Mariana, allying the 2 Dark Fae kingdoms in an unbreakable bond. How long do you think it'll be before they come for you? She rested her hand on the table as she leaned in close. You must take action first, Princess Willow. I beg of you to see reason. You're asking me to go to war, she replied. I can't do that unless I have proof of these crimes. You want proof? Go ask the goblins you took in, Iona said, and pointed behind her at the door. We have, but this lab you mentioned is gone. So is the farm you claim you were hiding at. All that was left were burnt-out shells of buildings. Wait. What? The farm was attacked. The goblins there had been defenseless. Had any of them lived? The blood drained from my face, and the room started to spin. Did anyone make it out alive? A firm hand grabbed my arm, keeping me upright, but whatever Jig said was lost in the rushing sounds that filled my ears. Nothing cut through it until Iona yelled, snapping me back to the present moment. You're sentencing them all to die. Is that what you want? Their blood on your hands. That's enough. Escort this half-breed from the hall immediately, the silver-haired Fae snapped as he pointed accusingly at Iona. You and your friends have enjoyed our hospitality quite long enough. I expect you to take your leave by the morning. Do I make myself clear? And where do you expect us to go? The Fae shrugged as he stomped to Iona. I don't give a damn as long as it's not here. Guards. The 2 Fae stepped forward to apprehend Iona. She braced her feet, and I knew exactly what she was going to do before she did it. I tore myself away from Jake and rushed forward on unsteady legs. Iona. She froze. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and slowly she turned her head to see me. The fury burning in her dark eyes might have intimidated me months ago, but not any longer. I glared right back, furious she hadn't told me about the incident at the farm. I remembered the fight at the lab and the goblins we'd rescued. I sure as hell remembered being stabbed. But afterward, each time I'd come to, she'd told me we were fine. That we were safe. She lied. Aiden, Princess Willow said, pulling my attention to her. It's good to see you awake and moving about. Is your wound healed? I'll live. What I would like to know is why you're not taking Iona seriously. Willow's sympathetic smile gave way to a frown. I'm afraid there is nothing I can do. You are the princess of a light Fae kingdom, aren't you? I asked. Surely you can speak to your parents and let them know the situation. The true situation. Jolian and Charuz are about to be torn apart by their rulers. It'll become a civil war that will spill over into your lands. I'm afraid I must follow the laws of my king and queen, Willow said, with all the regal dignity she could manage under the intense stare of Iona. We do not get involved in the politics of the Dark Fae kingdoms or them in ours. And we will not attack them unless they attack us first. We are a peaceful kingdom. That is how it has always been. Iona scoffed as she glowered at Willow. Then you're sentencing those goblins to death. My hands are tied. I am sorry. Forgive my advisors their harshness, but I must ask that you leave my lands. I will give you more time to prepare yourselves for the journey. Why not let the goblins stay at least? Iona asked. The hint of pleading in her tone surprised me. She never begged for anything. They've been through hell. You can't ask them to go back to a kingdom ruled by a woman out to destroy and enslave them. You aren't that cold-hearted, are you? Princess. Enough, Frederick, Willow said, cutting off the fly with the silver hair. I might be bound by the laws of my parents when it comes to acts of war, but I will not turn away those in need who are already in my lands. Frederick bowed and backed away. I'm sorry, Your Highness. Willow's eyes flicked to Iona. The goblins may continue to enjoy my hospitality, but you and your men must leave. I cannot have you spreading such fear and negativity throughout the capital of Brier. Very well, I told her when Iona couldn't seem to find the decency to answer. You, of course, are more than welcome to stay, Aiden. You are a healer, after all. We value those of your guild above all others. Iona's lip twitched at her words. I stepped forward and took Iona's hand. Willow's gaze turned curious as she observed our interaction. Thank you, but my place is with Iona. I hope you find a way to change your mind before it's too late. I gave Iona's hand a tug, and she let me pull her away from the Phi Princess and the guards flanking her. We were near the door when Iona stopped sharply and glanced over her shoulder. It might interest you to know some of the goblins who have died under Mariana's rule came from a small community called Brier Junction, named, I believe, because the goblins originally came from your kingdom. How many more have to die before you understand this problem isn't just going to go away because you want it to? Willow's lips parted as if she was going to speak, but Iona was moving again, and I followed her out the door. From the tension growing thicker between us by the second, as soon as we were alone, Iona and I were not just going to have a simple conversation about what had gone on since I was stabbed. I should have listened to Jig and stayed in bed a while longer.
Chapter 2. Iona. I didn't bother leading Aiden back to the room he'd been staying in. Instead, I dragged him to mine. Willow's order to leave Brier bothered me less now that she was letting the goblins stay. Not that one small act of kindness overshadowed the fact that she refused to help us with the bigger picture. War was coming, and it wasn't going to stop at the borders of Brier or Honeysuckle or Evergreen. It would flow over into the light and snuff it out for good. There'd be nothing except for the dark Phi and the bitch of a queen ruling them. The goblins, what few remained after the war finally ended, would remain enslaved. There was no happy ending on the horizon, not if we didn't find a way to stop Mariana. When I reached my room, I waited for Aiden to follow me in, then slammed the door behind him. I kept facing the door as I struggled to get a hold of my emotions. I was happy to see him up and walking around, but nearly watching him die was too much. Iona? What happened at the farm? He asked quietly. An image of the barn, burnt to ash with several dead inside, came to mind. I shut my eyes to chase away the image. It was attacked while we were gone. Either Mariana or Vencal sent men in to clear it out. How many died? The better question is how many lived, I mumbled without thinking. What? I let out a deep breath and slowly turned to face him. The healers who came to your aid are dead, as are the majority of those who were too weak to flee. Teresa, Henry, Matilda, they all made it, I said in a rush, as if that little bit of good news would make up for all the bad. I hesitated to tell him just how bad the casualties were, but heard myself say, over half of those in the barn perished. I'm sorry, Aiden. Why? He snapped, then ran his hands through his messy silver hair. You didn't kill them. I should have stayed behind. I should have been there. To do what? Die like the others. I remembered all too clearly the stab wound he received from Vencal, and how that had nearly been the death of him. It's good you weren't there. We found all those who ran and brought them here. They'll be safe. For how long? He backed away from me, then turned to face the wall of windows. The glass in my room was clear, and looked out over magnificently landscaped gardens overflowing with colorful flowers, even in the freezing cold. Leave it to the light Phi to magically maintain their gardens for the sheer joy of seeing such beauty. Aiden rested his forehead against the pane, his breath fogging up the cold glass. You said it yourself, war will make it here eventually. Not if I can help it. You can stay here tonight and sleep. Pull the cord by the door, and someone will bring you food. Where are you going? Somewhere else. If Her Highness is kicking us out of Brier, then I need to figure out where to go. Iona, wait. I told myself to get going, but my feet remained planted firmly in place as he approached. I know you're pissed at me. Just let it out. I can take it. No. No, you're not pissed. He stepped closer, and his presence surrounded me like it always did. I breathed it in. Somehow, after traveling in a truck for days on end, he smelt of crushed lavender and wood smoke even now. I hated him for it. Hated the way his scent comforted my nerves, when all I wanted to do was shout and scream at him for almost dying on me. You can't lie to me, not anymore. Let it go, Aiden. No, he said as he grabbed my shoulder with more strength than I expected him to have after lying in bed for a week. He spun me around and pressed me to the door. Talk to me. I wake up to find myself in an entirely different kingdom, and learn most of the goblins I spent months caring for are dead. His brows knitted, and I nearly reached up to smooth out the lines until my anger reared up again. I'm going to be dealing with this news for days. Weeks even, so don't stand there and tell me you're not mad at me. Fine, I yelled in his face. You want me to be mad? I'm mad, all right. I'm pissed off, and you want to know why. He didn't back off, just stayed right where he was, hardly a foot away from me. Tell me. Because you had to go and get yourself stabbed. I lifted his shirt so we could both see the bandaging wrapped around his chest. Just like Jarek, you think you have to protect me when I'm the one who's keeping you safe. That's my job, and you just threw yourself in front of Vencal like it wouldn't matter if you died. I glowered at the stab wound, then gently traced my fingers along the top of the bandages. My chest grew tight and it became hard to breathe. I'm sorry, he whispered as his hand found mine and held it. But I can't watch you die. Doesn't matter. I can take care of myself. Can you? I tore my hand free of his grasp. Yes, I damned well can. It's you and Jarek who seem to have death wishes. It's not a death wish. Seems like it to me. His usually light green eyes darkened as he leaned in closer. Says the woman who was ready to throw herself at the enemy head-on, consequences be damned, because she believes she's already dying. I am dying. You, however, will go on living unless you do something to get yourself killed. Like stopping an assassin from killing the person I most care about. His hands ran down my arms to my waist as he drew me in against his chest. I was worried about hurting him, but if he was in pain, he didn't show it. Aiden, the stoic healer. Who would have thought he could endure so much? Sure as hell not me. My breath caught, and just when I was ready to keep yelling at him, his lips touched mine. I buried my hands in his long, unruly hair, and stood on my toes to kiss him back. The heat from his kiss warred with the ever-burning fire of my anger at how much these past few months had cost me. Every night since we left the farm, I dreamt of Aiden being stabbed. Every single bloody night, until I thought it would drive me mad. As he held me, it was easy to tell myself that he was alive and he was here with me. But when we were apart, I was filled with a constant fear that when I went to look for him, he wouldn't be there because Vencal had killed him. He hugged me even closer as the kiss turned into so much more. But then he grimaced, and I forced myself to pull back. What's wrong? You're hurt, I said and removed myself from his arms. Eat and get some sleep. Until we find a way to end this war, there's always going to be a slim chance I get hurt, he said as I opened the door. There's a chance I might die. If that happens, you have to swear to me you won't do anything stupid. I won't have to, remember? He said my name, but I was out the door and pulled it shut behind me. I needed time to think, and figure out what our next move should be. And what I was to do with Aiden. As I strolled through the brightly lit halls of Willow's winter home, I bared my sharp canines at the cheerfulness that surrounded me. It was night. It was meant to be dark. It wasn't like it was midday, with the sun shining through every window. I stormed through corridors of hardwood floors and wooden beams until I reached the main floor and headed outside. There, at least, the night sky could not be manipulated to look like anything else. The sun had set, and stars peeked out from the inky blackness. The moon was new, casting shadows across the grounds. I was quite all right with that. Every day since coming to Brier had been filled with smiling faces and just too much beauty. Too much happiness. After all I'd seen, it nagged at me like an annoying itch I couldn't get to go away. As I wandered across the grounds and into the hedge maze on the southern end of the property, the days of driving to get here came to mind. Each breath Aiden took had seemed strained, like it would be his last. His heart had stopped twice. I wasn't even sure how I got it going again. By the time we crossed the border into the kingdom of Brier, I'd been awake for 2 days, hadn't eaten, and hadn't moved from Aiden's side. I'd lost Jarek. I was not going to lose Aiden, too. Willow had willingly taken us in, and I'd watched as her personal healer tended to Aiden. Then she'd pulled me aside and asked me what our purpose was for being in Brier. She'd stood there, flanked by her advisors, as I related exactly what had been going on in Charuz since King Jarek's death. Her look of horror, followed by her advisors telling me I must be mistaken, had sent me over the edge. If not for Henson and Jig standing by me, I might have strangled that silver-haired bastard Frederick. He'd been the voice of dissent this whole time. Part of me wanted to get him alone and ask him if he was secretly working for Mariana. Had she infiltrated the Light Phi kingdoms? She already convinced Prince Rayson to wed her, even though any fool knew she would kill him off once she had an army big enough to take on any enemy. She didn't need Rayson, not for long. The Dark Phi kingdoms would follow her. All she needed to do was find the way to off her new husband. I stopped at a fork in the maze and cursed. Mariana would blame it on the Light Phi. That would be her catalyst for starting a war with the 3 Phi kingdoms. Then she would have every right to attack them out of vengeance, with Vencal at her side leading the army. He'd gone from assassin to general by now, I had no doubt. She put too much faith in that monster. I chose the path to the right and walked deeper into the maze. How had my life unraveled so quickly? I stood on the edge of a cliff, teetering between being killed by the venom that had been injected into my veins, or dying while trying to stop a war to end all other wars. I was one half-breed, just one. How was I supposed to stand up against monarchs and armies? We only had one path to take, and that was to kill Mariana and the entire council of advisors. We had to overthrow the government of Charuz and Jolien. I'd hoped Willow would have seen reason by now, but she was too much of a good daughter to take a risk and go against the decrees of her parents. We'd be going up against the might of Charuz and Jolien, with just little ol' me, Henson, Jig, and whatever fighters survived the attack at the lab and the farm. And Aiden. He'd never stay behind. The world was falling apart around us, and I wanted to kick myself for getting so emotionally tied to another Phi. Aiden was too kind a soul to be flung into this shitstorm, but it was too late now. His hands were stained with blood. Blood that in his mind would never be washed away. I did that to him. I put him in that situation. The kind Phi who saved me so many nights ago was changing right before my eyes. And in turn, he was changing me. The hard exterior I put on to protect myself from feeling too much had begun to chip when I met Jarek. With Aiden, it was falling apart in chunks, and soon wouldn't exist at all. With it went my edge, and the drive to do whatever necessary to succeed. The hedges parted and 4 paths converged. A massive oak grew in the center, calm and barren in the midst of winter. Its boughs stretched high into the air, and out to the edges the tips of the branches barely touched the tops of the hedges. Around its trunk was a shallow pool that had frozen over. Something about the tree, standing so resolute, gave me pause. It stood guard in the center of the maze, never wavering or faltering, not even when its branches were bare and its bark brittle. I circled around it, wondering if I'd stumbled onto a sacred location, when a sudden urge to touch the tree had me raising my hand to do just that. I flattened it against the rough bark. I gasped as I was thrown from my body into a flood of images that came almost too fast to process. I yanked my hand away. My palm was marked with the impression of the bark. What had I just seen? I took a step back, but a voice that sounded an awful lot like Jarek whispered that I needed to stay. Holding my breath, I pressed my hand to the mysterious tree again and shut my eyes. This time the images slowed, and I came face to face with a far worse future than I could have ever imagined. Fire ripped through the lands of Charuz and Jolian, destroying everything in its path. An army of goblins and Fae marched against the capital of Brier, which was already on fire. Ashes flew everywhere. Screams of the dying filled my ears, and there, leading the charge, was Vencal, dressed all in white armor stained with the blood of the fallen. The image faded, just as the evil Fae ordered the army to charge. My head spun, and then I was back in Charuz, standing before a crowd of goblins with collars around their necks. We weren't at the capital, though. We were in a field I recognized. One from the farm. There were Fae scattered amongst the goblins, all looking defeated. There was no life in their eyes. None. The sky was black, and the air was heavy with smoke. "Bring him," Mariana's voice shouted. I whipped around to see a platform had been built. She stood atop it with Vencal at her side. Two guards dragged a figure between them, his face covered with a hood. They hauled him up the steps of the platform and forced him to his knees. Vencal yanked the hood off his head, and my heart lurched. "No," I gasped. Aiden. His hair was long and pulled back in a warrior's braid. His eyes were hard and cold. He wore heavy gear, like I would wear when going into combat. I glanced at his forearms and was startled to find the healer tattoos that once graced his skin had been twisted and morphed. I didn't recognize the markings at first, and then it hit me. They were a version of the tattoos I had on my arms, but the details had changed. "Finally, the traitor has been brought to justice," Mariana said loudly as she stood before Aiden. "It would appear you have lost. Do you have anything you wish to say?" Aiden grinned up at her, then spit at her feet. Vencal stalked around Aiden and yanked his head back by his braid, exposing his throat. I rushed forward as if to stop it, but my hands passed right through Vencal and Aiden like I wasn't even there. "It's a shame she's not around to see your death," Mariana said with a wicked grin. "I want you to know she died in agony." Aiden snarled and struggled to get at Mariana, but Vencal held him too tightly. "I will spare you," Mariana said loudly over Aiden's cursing, "if you tell me where the rest of them are hiding." Aiden froze and glared right at her. For a second, it was like I was looking at an image of myself. "Is that a no?" "What the hell do you think, bitch?" Aiden threw his head back and nailed Vencal in the face. The assassin released his grip, and Aiden threw himself at Mariana. The crowd of goblins and Fae kept prisoner cheered him on. The bonds holding his wrists came loose, and then he had his hands wrapped around the queen's throat, choking the life from her. Mariana's eyes bulged as she clawed to get free. The fury in Aiden's eyes was like a living beast fighting to get free. But it was over too soon. Chaos erupted in the crowd as Vencal ordered the prisoners silenced. Gunshots exploded around me as goblins and Fae were killed point blank. I yelled for Aiden, even though I knew he couldn't hear me. It was too late. Vencal stabbed up and under his ribs, right into his heart. Aiden's body shuddered, then went limp. He crashed forward, and Vencal gave him a helpful shove over the edge of the platform. His body landed in a heap at my feet, eyes staring up at me. Dead eyes. A scream tore free of my throat, and then I was falling. I hit something cold and hard. Ice. Frantically, I scrambled back to see I'd fallen at the base of the tree. I was back in the hedge maze. And Aiden was alive. He had to still be alive. "What did you see?" I jumped and spun around, barely managing to stay on my feet. Willow stood a few yards away, head tilted as she looked at me curiously. "See?" She nodded as she approached, her dress trailing in the frozen grass behind her. She wore a heavy dark green coat and gloves to match. Her breath puffed out in front of her face. She reached me and offered a hand. Grudgingly I took it, and she helped me to my feet. This tree is old, very old, she said with a tone of awe. It's been here for too many generations to count. I didn't know it was here. Most don't. Most never venture into the hedge maze unless something calls to them. Her fingers hovered over the bark and she shut her eyes. I'll admit it's never spoken to me, but clearly it wanted to show you something. Yeah, the future I feared is going to happen. No, Willow argued quietly. Just one possibility amongst many. What do you mean? She smiled sadly as she withdrew her hand. I understand your anger with me, I do, but what this tree shows you is a version of the future that can happen, depending on what choice you make next. From what others have said after having visions, it seems to show you the worst possible outcome. Why the hell would it do that? To give you hope that the path you must walk won't be as bleak as you think. At least, that's what I believe. Others would say different, I suppose. It's all open to interpretation. She worried at her lower lip, then whispered, How bad was it? What you saw? I studied the bark of the tree, and the imprint left on my palm. The end, I replied. The end of everything we care about. The end of light itself. Then you can't let that future come to pass. I laughed harshly. You say that like it's easy. Do you have any idea what we're going up against? I'm one person. I can't stop this war from coming. You wouldn't have been shown the vision if there wasn't something you could do about it. Sure, whatever you say, Your Highness, I muttered and turned my back to her. Don't give up on yourself so easily, she called as I started to walk away. The others haven't. Your friends, the man you love. They all believe in you. Maybe they shouldn't. I shut my eyes as I saw Aiden being stabbed all over again in my vision. A vision of a future where I was dead, and he'd turned into the darkest version of himself. All I've done is fail up to this point. That's not true, and you know it. She marched toward me, and then she was in front of me. She moved faster than I expected. I frowned at the glimmer of fierce determination in her eyes. You have saved countless lives already, Iona. Many of those goblins would be dead if it wasn't for you. You brought the research needed for my healers to find an antidote to this plague sweeping through the Dark Fi kingdoms. You're making it possible for the goblins to live and have a fighting chance. And it's all worth nothing if I can't stop the evil one from carrying out her plans for domination, I argued as my hands curled into fists. What don't you get, princess? I can't do this. I don't have an army, and I sure as hell don't have any allies to turn to. You are strong enough. To do what? March straight at the enemy and get myself killed? I moved to go around her when she rested her hands on my shoulders. A burst of hope and lightness rushed through my core the second she made contact. I gasped, my eyes widening at the aura of light surrounding her. This was not Willow speaking. It only looked like her. You listen to me, Iona, she said, her voice tinged with a power that cascaded over me in waves of purity and purpose. You must find a way to fight against the darkness that's coming. If you cannot, then the future I showed you will come to pass. I fumbled for words and managed to mumble, I can't. Quit doubting your strength. You are still alive. You still breathe. Not many can be attacked with Reaper venom and live. I'm still dying, I whispered, realizing I had to be speaking with one of the ancient deities of the Light Fi. Why could nothing ever be simple for me? Yes, you are, unless you hold on to your faith in the man you love. Trust him. I do. Not enough. You must have faith. Let go of your fears and your worries. Her grip tightened on my shoulders, and my head was thrown back as another vision slammed into me. One of Aiden and me, standing on the front porch of a large cabin. Wood surrounded us. We were smiling. Happy. He wrapped his arms around me and I was home. A single tear slipped from my eye as the vision faded, and I was left staring into the softly glowing eyes of Willow. You know what you must do, she uttered, though her lips never moved. So do it. Save them and you save yourself. The pressure on my shoulders faded. I blinked at the sudden void where Willow had been standing, No, not Willow, I reminded myself. I blew out a shaky breath as I steadied myself. I was alone, and no longer standing in the center of the hedge maze. I contemplated the task I'd been given, and the two visions I'd been left with. They tugged at my heart, until I was rushing to get back inside to Aiden. The stark reality of how our futures might play out depended on my willingness to fight. This urged me on. Did I want Aiden to turn into a heartless killer because of me? Did I want him facing the enemy without me by his side? Whatever deity or spirit spoke to me said to have faith in Aiden and myself. Faith that we would be strong enough to face this war on our own. If I gave up now, I was as good as dead. The odds were stacked against us so high it was laughable. And yet there was a slim chance that we would make it out of this mess alive. When I reached the door to my room, I rushed inside to find Aiden sitting at the foot of the bed. He frowned when I entered and shut the door behind me. His brow furrowed more when I flipped the lock. Iona? Where have you been? Out, I replied. It's nearly daybreak. I was starting to worry about you. He moved to stand, but I reached him first, and he remained seated. Look, I know you think what I did was stupid and idiotic, but I'm telling you right now, if I have to do it again to keep you alive, I will. And before you ask, I'm not staying here with the goblins. I'm coming with you, one way or another. I let my gaze wander over the firm line of his jaw, then down to his lean build. I blinked, and the silver hair that hung nearly to his shoulders was suddenly pulled back in a tight braid. I swallowed the agony of seeing him killed and reached for him. His arms wrapped around my waist. The emotions I'd been too scared to show him slipped free of my control and surrounded us both in a swirling storm of a feeling so strong they stirred the very air we breathe. I never wanted to be parted from this Phi. How could I be when he was a part of me? This man was the one I was meant to be with. He was my heart and my very soul. The deity's words had opened my eyes to the truth I'd been too scared to admit. He lifted his hand to cup my cheek. Is there something you're not telling me? Later. I promise, I'll tell you everything later. He buried his hands in my hair and captured my mouth with his. There might be a war on the horizon and venom still coursing through my veins, but for a little while, at least, I was going to let myself get lost in Aiden's arms and let my doubts and worries fall away.
Chapter 3. Aiden. How much do you believe about the old stories? About the ancient deities of the Phi? Iona said quietly. She was draped across my chest, careful not to rest any weight on my wound. I'd been running my fingers lazily down her spine and back up to twirl her silver hair. Why do you ask? Because I think I met one last night. My fingers stopped as I frowned at her. What? Where? In the hedge maze. I saw a few things too. Part of me still thinks it's a dream, and the other is pretty damn sure it was real. She sat up and nibbled her bottom lip with one sharp canine. I was shown two different futures for us. And from the way your eyes glittered, one of them wasn't that great. I sat up, then drew her into my arms. She rested there easily, as if it was where she was meant to be. I kissed the top of her head. Tell me. The steady beating of her heart kept time as I waited for her to explain what she saw. I expected her not to, after she'd remained quiet for so long, but then she started talking. She told me about what she saw when she touched the tree at the center of the maze, then her conversation with whatever being had taken on the form of Willow. I held her protectively as she went on and on, rambling about everything that she was worried about. What she was scared of losing. Through it all, I stayed quiet and let her talk. It was like she hadn't done so in ages. She just opened up and let everything out she'd been bottling up inside. When she started to talk about what remained of the farm and all the goblins who had died, she ran out of energy and slumped against me. I can't believe they're all gone, she whispered. All of them. It's a drop in the bucket compared to how many we'll lose if we don't keep fighting. She sat up and looked me square in the eye. I'm willing to fight until whatever end, but Aiden, I don't want to lose you. Sounds like there's a chance you won't. She hugged me close and I kissed her hair, breathing her in. The deity or whatever she was told you to have faith, right? Easier said than done for someone like me. You can't punch your way out of every situation, I told her with a laugh that had her scowling at me. I'm just saying, when a deity takes the time to talk to you, listening is a good idea. I entwined her fingers with mine and contented myself with simply listening to her breathe as the sun rose in the sky. It had to be close to noon, but neither of us seemed ready to leave the confines of this room. The bright colors of the rugs and drapes, even the comforter and sheets were nothing like either of us was used to. For the first time since starting on this adventure with Iona, I missed the rustic charm of my cabin in the woods. Picturing us there together, living out a peaceful existence wasn't hard now that we'd finally opened up to one another. Let the other one in enough to understand what we felt for each other. The notion that there was a future where she would be killed and I turned into a killer, possibly the leader of some rebellion, didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. At least, not the part of me that was changing into someone I never thought I'd be. The part about Iona not being by my side that had my heart weighing heavy. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Probably too much and not enough," I replied, making her roll her eyes. "When this is all over, and we can finally get on with our lives." "If that day ever comes, you mean," she interrupted. "When it does," I corrected, "I want you to come and live with me. We'll build a new place, just as you saw." "Aiden," she whispered and trailed her fingers down my jaw. "Have faith, remember. Faith in us." She sat up until we were eye level, cupped my face in her hands and pressed her lips to mine. "I will always have faith in you. I just can't say the same about myself." I covered her hands with mine. "It's not just on you, not anymore. You've got me, Henson, and Jake. I'm sure there are others who are more than willing to keep fighting. I just wish we could disappear right now. Take off for the mountains. You're not the kind to leave so many to die." She sighed and drew away. "Sadly, I'm not, which means I need to get working on a plan before we leave Brier." Iona went off to track down Henson and Jig, leaving me to venture through the large chateau to find the healers. They were supposedly working on breaking down the research we stole from the lab, according to Iona, and had been hard at work these past few days, creating a cure to this new plague. After speaking with several different guards throughout the chateau, I was finally pointed toward the east wing, where the healers had taken up residence. The room was airy and filled with natural light from an array of windows stretching from floor to ceiling. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the right side of the ceiling. A roaring fire was going in the hearth at the rear of the room. Various wooden work tables were scattered about, with a healer standing at most of them. "Ah, good to see you up and moving about," a goblin said as he approached. He was tall for his kind. The hand he offered was rough, his skin a pale gray. His bald head was covered in various tattoos, designating him master of the healing arts. It took me a second to take his hand. "Sorry, have we met?" He chuckled warmly, his black eyes shining. "Tennyson's the name. I tended to your wound when you arrived. Your woman was quite beside herself. First time I've had someone threaten to shove her boot so far up my ass, it'd come out my throat if I let you die." I cringed. "Sounds like Iona. Sorry about that." "Why?" "Easy to see. She loves you, and I'm happy to see you are alive." The goblin patted my shoulder, then motioned for me to follow him through the workspace. "I expect you're here to check on our progress." "Yes, if you don't mind the intrusion. What I've seen these last few months are the worst things I've ever seen." I shuddered, remembering the goblins in cages and the number of ill that had been in that barn. My stomach twisted uncomfortably as I recalled how many of them were now dead, not from the plague, but from being burned alive. "You have much on your mind," Tennyson said as his gaze turned quizzical. "If you're worried about finding a cure, I believe we are onto something." "Already?" "You are in a room full of master healers who have been working around the clock since this information was brought to us. Whoever came up with this plague is smart, but we are smarter. We shall have a cure in a few more days. A week at most, I'd say." At his words, I studied each healer and noticed they were covered in tattoos, much like Tennyson. There was hardly any bare skin to be seen on their arms, necks, chests, or hands. Half were goblins, and the other were fae, but they worked together harmoniously. "How is it you came to be a master?" I asked, then realized how that could sound. Not that I have anything against goblins being masters. I was training Teresa, one of the goblins with us, how to be a healer, but I thought the guild didn't allow full-blooded goblins to train. Tennyson's smile fell. "Yes, well, that is the law in Charuz and Jolian. The guild has different laws." "Since when?" "Since forever. The rulers of the Dark Fae kingdoms have simply neglected to let it be known. They buried the truth after the last uprising. Then I suppose it's time we unbury it." Teresa could have been inducted to the guild all this time. If I'd even thought to travel outside the Dark Fae kingdoms and speak with Light Fae members of the guild about more than just the latest run of the Gobpox, I could have gotten her out of Timber Falls years ago. There were so many talented goblins, and they were denied a chance to better themselves, all because of the Dark Fae prejudices against them. Tennyson stayed by my side as I walked slowly around the room. He told me what each healer worked on, and my spirits were lifted even more by their success. Perhaps last night wasn't simply a fluke. When Iona came back to me last night, the change in her caught me off guard. There was a light in her eyes I'd never noticed before. Hope had been kindled, and by this morning it had grown into a full-fledged fire burning within her. The deity had told her to have faith, and though it was hard for her to do so, she was trying her best. Thinking of her eyes clouding with the poison stilled my steps. "Aiden, what do you know about Reaper venom?" Tennyson's eyes narrowed so much I wasn't entirely sure they were still open. "It's a very potent substance that has only ever successfully been created once, to my knowledge." "Twice." I glanced around, to be certain Iona wasn't going to suddenly appear. "Who's been poisoned?" "Iona," I told him. "I thought I cured her of it months ago, but the symptoms keep coming back. She loses her sight, her hearing, eventually, more of her senses will go. I promised her I would find an antidote, but I'm out of ideas. If she's to keep fighting, I need something that will keep the venom from affecting her until I track down the man who dosed her." "You think he carries an antidote?" "I do." Tennyson murmured quietly under his breath as he walked around the work tables until he reached one at the front of the room. "I might be able to come up with something." "You're heading out tomorrow, yes?" "Yeah." "Can you have something by then?" "I will see what I can do." I left him to his work and wandered away from the East Wing. Iona said she would be meeting with Henson and Jake to come up with a plan, but there was someone else I wanted to check in with first. Iona had mentioned where the goblins had taken up residence. The chateau had a large guest house out on the grounds. It was where the goblins who were well enough to look after themselves had taken up residence, and was where I was headed now. The air was cold, but no snow covered the ground here. The sky was a clear, crisp blue, and the sunshine was warm on my skin. It seemed like forever since I felt its rays. As I walked across the grounds, I searched for any sign of the hedge maze Iona mentioned. There were gardens stretching as far as I could see along the sides of the stone path I followed. Weeping willows lined the grounds beyond them. There was no sign of a hedge maze, though. I stopped a passing Fae and asked where the maze might be. He shook his head, then paused. "Ah, someone you know has seen it." "Yes. I was wondering where it was." He patted my shoulder as he said, "The maze doesn't appear to everyone, I'm afraid. If you can't see it, you aren't meant to." Then he went on his way. Any lingering doubts I had about who Iona spoke with disappeared, and I picked up the pace to reach the guest house and the goblins inside. I was just through the front door when a goblin tackled me in a hug. Teresa squeezed me as hard as she could as I lifted her off her feet and hugged her right back. "Thank the gods you're alive," she exclaimed as she stood back and held my face in her hands. I wasn't sure you were going to make it. I did. I'm just thrilled you're alive, all of you. Matilda and Henry came up behind her, and I embraced them too. The rest of the goblins in the house smiled and cheered, most appearing to be in good spirits and on the mend. Iona told me about the farm, I said quietly as Teresa squeezed my hand. Don't do that, she snapped harshly. Don't you dare blame yourself, Aiden. You nearly died trying to save them all. Their spirits will understand. What about all the others? I backed away from them and went to sit on the couch in the sitting room. Princess Willow has requested we leave tomorrow. You and the rest of the goblins are more than welcome to stay. She didn't believe Iona, Teresa asked, but she didn't sound surprised. I think it has to do with what she's allowed to do without breaking several laws of Brier. We can't stay here while Mariana carries out her plans to enslave the goblins and build an army. We, Matilda repeated as she grasped for my hands. Aiden, are you sure about this? My place is with Iona. I can't leave her to face the future alone. I won't. Matilda hung her head, but when she lifted it again, she was grinning. As much as it worries me to see you leave, I am very happy for you. We all are. Between us four, we were starting to get a wee bit worried about you being alone for the rest of your life, she added with a wink. I'm glad I could put your minds at ease. It's your mind we've been concerned with, Teresa said as she sat down beside me. You sure you don't want us to come with you? You're the new elder, remember? You have an entire group of goblins to look after. They're going to need a new home if we can't stop the war and liberate the goblins of Charuz and Jolien. It would be hard leaving them behind, but at least here they would be safe. I trusted Princess Willow and the Fae of Brier to protect them. She might not be willing to mount a full-out attack against the Dark Fae kingdoms, but she wouldn't let any harm befall those under her care. She was a kind-hearted ruler, as her parents were. As most of the Light Fae were. I stayed with Teresa, Matilda, and Henry for another hour, until I grew anxious and decided it was time to find Iona. Evening had fallen, and the sun was quickly setting behind a bank of clouds ready to bring more snow. I prayed it would hold off until we were back in Charuz. Bad weather was not what any of us needed to deal with. You really think that's a good idea? Jig asked for the fourth time. Iona grunted in annoyance. I don't see what the problem is. There's 20 or so of us. We can't take on Mariana's forces on our own, as much as I'd like to say we can. But contacting the Fighters Guild. You do realize half of them believe you're a traitor, Henson told her. Not to mention, we have no idea who we can trust after the stunt we pulled back in Charuz. And the fact that someone found us at the farm. He had a point, but I kept my mouth shut. I sat at a round table in a meeting room Willow lent to us to make our plans. Henson and Jig were here, along with 5 fighters. From the markings on their arms, they were just under the ranks of Iona and the other 2. Gray was one of them, and I thought the other woman might be called Jolene. The rest of their names were lost on me. Who else can we turn to right now? Iona asked loudly. We have no other option. Just saying this is a bad idea, Jig said. But you're right. We don't have a choice. Great, then we contact Xavier tonight, tell him we're coming, and pray that he hasn't been turned against us. Iona sounded sure, but there was a tiny sliver of doubt in her eyes. I took her hand on the table and simply held it, lending her my strength and silently reminding her about her promise to have faith. She slid me a sideways glance, and her lips twitched in a smile. I'll do it, Henson told us as he stood. No sense in alerting everyone to your presence just yet. Pretty sure you're wanted too. He shrugged at Iona's comment. Not as much as you are. Mariana's still telling everyone that you killed Jarek. You're the most wanted person in Charuz. And probably Jolien by now. Henson took a dagger from his hip and walked toward the hearth set in the far wall. This should only take a moment. Iona said she was going to check in with the rest of the fighters and ensure they were packed and ready to go at first light. She nodded to me, then exited the room with Gray, Jolene, and the 3 fighters in tow. Once the door closed behind her, I waited 30 seconds, then turned to Jig and Henson. "How's she been?" Henson's lips thinned. "Not terrible, but not great. Noticed her stumbling about a few times, like she can't see a damn thing. Then she'd disappear for a few hours." "Hearing's the same," Jig said quietly, eyes on the door. "Damned woman nearly burnt her hand the other night when she went to rest her hand on a hot stove. Wasn't even paying attention. Said she was just distracted, but I don't think she could feel it, the heat." "She didn't tell you anything?" I shook my head and turned away from Henson and Jig. "I've got that Tennyson goblin working on something to help. But not an antidote." When I glanced back at Henson, his brow was furrowed and his shoulders were tense. "Honestly, I think we both know who has the antidote. Making the one to save her will take more time than I think she has." "Great, just add one more damn thing to the list," Henson muttered, then slashed his dagger down his palm. Blood wet the blade, and just as Iona had done to contact Henson, it glowed red-hot as he tossed it into the fire. The flames turned violet as they consumed the dagger. With a crackling of the logs beneath, the dagger and the violet flames vanished. "How long until he contacts you?" I asked when a loud pop came from the hearth. Jig was on his feet when the second pop sent sparks flying into the room. "Not long, apparently." His hand went to the dagger at his hip as he glanced worriedly at Henson. "Something's not right." Another spark had me on my feet as the flames expanded outward with a fierce roar. They twisted and turned as Jig and Henson backed away. Just when I wondered if I should yell for Iona, Henson grabbed me by the arm and threw me toward the door. The hearth erupted in a small explosion that took out half the wall and threw the 3 of us out into the hallway. Guards came running, shouting in a panic, but it was Iona who appeared at my side and hauled me upright. "What did you do?" she asked Henson. "I thought you were contacting Xavier." "I tried," he said, then coughed as smoke filled the room. He waved his hand in front of his face, then stepped over the debris. "I think getting to Xavier might be harder than we think." Iona rushed in around him, and I was right on her heels. She cursed, and I wasn't sure what the problem was aside from an exploded hearth until I spied the words burnt into the upper part of the wall. "Fighters Guild has fallen. Masters taken captive. Keep yourselves alive." X. I asked. "Xavier," Jig replied. From the stony set to Jig's, Henson's, and Iona's faces, they were not about to listen to their old master. So much for this being the easy part of our journey.
Chapter 4. Iona. I checked the knives at my hips, my boots, lower back, and the pistol holstered at my side. All that was left was to put on the face paint, and I'd be ready for battle. Taking on the Fighters Guild headquarters would be exactly that. There were only 26 of us. We could not afford to lose a single soul. No pressure, none at all. Henson waited by the lead truck for me, but as I started toward him, the strong smell of herbs surrounded me and I waited. Aiden. He'd been up most of the night with me, ensuring my sight was intact and my hearing and everything else. Then we'd spent the rest of the night talking about the possible future when we stopped the war. I hadn't wanted to keep picturing us happy on that front porch, but he told me again and again, the more we focused on that bright future, the more it would build my hope and faith that we could have it. As I spent more time with Aiden, I realized how much I didn't deserve him. "One more thing," Aiden said as I spun to face him. "Take this." I frowned at the small vial of dark green liquid. "What is it?" "Something Tennyson, the healer in Brier, made for you. He said it had to ferment for 3 days before you could drink it. It's been 3 days." I swallowed it down. It was sour and I gagged. He took the empty vial, shoved it in his pocket, then cupped my face in his hands. His eyes turned inquisitive as they narrowed, and he studied mine. "I'll be fine and we'll be back," I told him. "You remember where to go?" "Yeah, I do." Though I'm not sure it's a good idea. Don't you have faith in my plans? I asked with a teasing smile. I do, but going back to Timber Falls. Won't they think to look there? That's why I sent men there last night to ensure if anyone did come looking, they'd regret it. It'll be good to be back in a familiar location, and we're close to the capital. His light green eyes filled with concern. I'll be there waiting for you. Just don't take too long. I stood on my toes and lightly brushed my lips against his one more time. I won't. We rested our foreheads together, and then I was turning and walking away. If I stayed there much longer, I might never leave, and there were others who needed me today. I climbed in the truck behind the wheel, with Henson in the passenger seat and Jig behind us with Gray and Jolene. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. I threw it into drive, and we set off down the gravel road on the outskirts of Charuz. You sure you don't want to do this at night? Gray asked. It won't matter if it's night or day, Jig answered for me. You know as well as the rest of us that HQ is a fortress. Breaking in at any time is foolish. Then why are we doing it? Jolene asked, her words strained with her nerves. Because we don't have any other choice and, I said as I locked gazes with Jig in the rearview mirror. We may or may not have a way in so no one will see us. There's no secret passages there. Henson, Jig, and I chuckled at Gray's words. There didn't used to be secret passages at HQ, he was right, but we weren't always the most well-behaved trainees. Before a fighter was marked with their first rank, they were not supposed to leave the grounds. It took a minimum of 7 years to reach that rank, and during those years, I wasn't exactly keen on being trapped in a building with a bunch of arrogant pricks. We might be part of the same guild, but most of the Phi who joined were either looking for an excuse to kill or believed they're better than everyone beneath them, especially the new half-breed. Namely me. Jig was a few years ahead of me in training, and had been assigned as my mentor. Henson was my age, and the three of us bonded the night they caught me trying to sneak out and go to the nearest town. That night was the first time I learned to trust anyone. They became my closest friends. My only friends, actually. One evening, they surprised me with a secret way out of HQ. They'd found it a few years back, and had been spending their nights clearing out the debris and making it passable. As far as they knew, none of the current masters knew it existed. There was a chance someone had found the passage, where it was hidden behind the statue in the courtyard of the founding guild master, but it was our only way in that didn't involve striding through the front doors. I turned right onto a 2-lane blacktop road, and headed north toward the Fighters Guild headquarters. It'd be a solid 2 hours to get there, and who knew how long to get in, get Xavier and the others out, then get back to Timber Falls. A lot could go wrong in that much time. I supposed it was time I listened to that deity, and had faith that for once our plan would work. I lifted the trapdoor that led to the main level of HQ, and listened. During the day, the majority of the fighters would be out on the grounds, sparring or carrying out other training in the rooms above. The main floor would be vacated for the most part. We made it through the passage, though we'd nearly been caught. A patrol had been passing by when Henson yanked on Jig's leg, and he came crashing into all of us crammed in the narrow space. Well? Henson breathed in my ear. It's clear. We need to get straight to the holding cells. We'll go up in pairs. Henson whispered, then tapped my shoulder. I took another 5 seconds to listen, then lifted the trapdoor enough to slip through. Henson caught it with his hand as I crept toward the nearest wall. Flaming dagger in hand, I peered around the stones. The trapdoor dumped us in a side hall that led to storage rooms for weapons and gear. I waved to Henson, and he crawled out, then pressed his back flat to the wall behind me. He tapped my shoulder again, and we slipped down the hall a few feet at a time. Behind us, I faintly heard the creak of the trapdoor, until we were too far away to hear as more fighters slipped through the opening. We reached the main intersection of the hallways. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting the great masters of our past and their victories. We paused. Voices trickled down to us from the other corridors and offices nearby, but no one walked into the hall. Keeping my dagger ready, just in case, I stepped out of the one hall and hurried across the one directly opposite. Henson stayed on my heels as we raced to get to the door leading to the cells below. It was unguarded, but there was an alarm on it that required an access code. The moment we got the door open, we'd have exactly 5 minutes before the alarm would sound. I hauled my hand back to smash it into the control panel when Henson snatched my wrist. Wait. Aiden gave me something for this. I frowned at him, confused. Medicine for the control panel? Henson smirked as he fumbled in his pockets, then pulled out a clump of something wrapped in wax paper. In a sense. He said it's a moldable poison. An acid. It'll eat through the wires and with any luck, not set off the alarm. It will if it eats through all the wires. Then we stop it before it reaches the one that will do that, he replied. Can you get into the panel without demolishing it? I crouched beneath the panel and used my dagger to loosen the screws. In the time it took me to remove the back panel and tug a clump of wires loose, 2 more fighters had joined us. If we didn't get through this damn door soon enough, we'd be crammed in this corridor and someone would notice. I took the toxin from Henson, and after separating the wires and using a torn bit of the wax paper, I dabbed each wire connected to the panel. The only one I left alone was the blue wire. Unless they'd changed the entire security system, that was the one that triggered the alarm. Smoke rose from the wires as the substance ate away at them. Lights flickered on the control panel, then it sparked, and the heavy deadbolt that sealed the door thudded open. I carefully dropped the wires and handed the rest of the poison back to Henson. Not too shabby, he commented. I'll have to let Aiden know it worked. I wasn't sure we should be celebrating yet, as the poison continued to eat away at the wires. Let's just get down there and rescue Xavier and the others. I'll be happy once we're out of here. I tugged the door open and slipped through the opening. The 6 of us now hustled down the wide set of stairs to the lowest level. The entrance opened into a large room with a high ceiling. Bare bulbs hung from the ceiling every yard or so. Cells lined the perimeter, and a single main desk was set up in the very center with a solitary guard standing watch. He didn't even look up as we approached, too engrossed in the paperwork he had in his hands. About damn time, he muttered when I reached the desk. My shift was over 10 minutes ago, you sack of shit. If you're late again, I'm reporting your ass. Our new command does not take breaking the rules lightly. Really? I said, and just as the Phi lifted his face in alarm, I aimed the tip of my dagger under his chin. The paper fell from his hands as he raised them. Now who might that be? Iona? I didn't have to look to my right to know who was there. Long time no see, Xavier. I told you to stay away, Henson, Xavier snapped. What can I say? Once a rebel, always a rebel, Henson told him as he walked around the desk and grabbed the set of keys off the desk. The Phi guard glowered at him, but I dug the tip of my dagger under his chin, and he stood on his toes to escape being hurt. As Henson rushed to free the prisoners from the cells, I guided the Phi out from behind his desk. Now then, who's in charge of the guild? I asked. The Phi's eyes narrowed, but then they flicked to those who stood behind me. He licked his lips nervously and muttered, Vencal. Who put him in charge? Our beloved queen saw fit to give him a promotion. She has no power over the guild, I argued, then glanced around at the fighters now freed from their cells. Xavier wasn't the only master down here. There were 5 in total. All but one stood around, looking like they had the shit beaten out of them. Vencal showed up here one night with a horde of men, Xavier explained. He came with an offer from Queen Mariana. If we turned over control of the guild to her, we would remain in power. If not, we would be executed. Needless to say, not all of us saw it fit to defend our way of life and uphold the code of the guild. He came forward and held out his hand. The dagger, if you please, Iona. I let Xavier take it without question and stepped back. More of the fighters we'd brought trickled down the stairs, Jig amongst them. He motioned to me, and I pushed my way through the now crowded room to reach him. Trouble? I whispered. Possibly. Heard a commotion as we came down. I left 4 men posted at the top of the stairs. We need to go. Now. I was in full agreement with him, but if it was Vencal who took over the guild, there was a chance he might be in the same building we were in now. I hurried back toward Xavier. Vencal, I said. Is he here? Iona, we don't have time for this, Jig snapped. Is he here or not? I asked. Well? He cleared out 2 days ago, the Phi replied. Is he coming back any time soon? I don't know. They don't tell us anything. Jig grabbed my shoulder hard. Iona, we need to leave. We'll get him. Just not today. I gnashed my teeth, hating that he was right. I could spend all day interrogating the fighters in this building, but we'd never make it out of here alive if I wasted time trying to get intel on Vencal. Hating we didn't have enough fighters to successfully take the guild back, I nodded at Jig. Xavier, I said, we don't have time for revenge. His hand tightened around the dagger, and the flame turned a deep crimson that matched the fire raging under the tattoo on his right arm. The Phi scrunched his eyes shut, waiting for the killing blow, but Xavier lowered the dagger and handed it back to me. You're right. Time enough for that later, after you explain to me what the hell you've gotten yourself into. Long story. I herded the liberated prisoners toward the stairs. Our numbers had tripled. Getting everyone out of here in one piece without being spotted would be far from easy. The passage was no longer an option. We'd be trapped down there. Thank the gods Xavier trained us all so well. Hence and Jig, time for plan B. And I thought we were going to make it out of here without blowing something up, Henson said with a wink. Iona, what are you planning? Xavier asked. You really want to know, or would you rather just trust your best student? He wrapped his hand around the skull tattoos on my left arm. I'll never doubt you, Iona. Never. If you can get us out of here, then we'll follow you. Hearing those words bolstered my spirits. I knew many within the guild believed I had been behind the Jarek's death. It was reassuring to hear from Xavier's lips that he was not among that number. From the encouraging nods around me, no one in this basement dungeon was. Right. Let's get going. I turned for the staircase as a loud whine turned into a blaring siren. Damn it. That was what I'd been worried about. The poison must have kept eating away at the wires, and finally made it through one of the blue ones. Stay close and follow me, I yelled over the piercing screech of the alarm. Directed by the 4 masters, the fighters fell in line. Not in all my years of training beneath them did I ever expect to have them following my lead. Letting it get to me now would ensure a failure. So I turned my back on their expectant faces and raced to the top of the stairs. I peered out and waited, counting off the seconds. The first round of shouts reached my ears. A patrol of 5 fighters sprinted right for the door. Only 5. They should have sent more. I readied my daggers, and as the first one reached out to open the door, I burst through with a yell and attacked. Gray and Jolene came out right behind me, and the 5 fighters went down in less than 15 seconds. I readied my daggers again, and crept to the edge of the hall. The first sounds of an explosion made the fortress shake. Dust fell from the wooden beams. One, I muttered to myself, then led the way deeper into the fortress. I turned a corner, and came to face with another fighter. He shouted in alarm, but I knocked his pistol aside. The bullet slammed into the stones behind me. I headbutted him, then kneed him in the groin. I twisted his arm and heard a loud crack. His high-pitched scream made me smile as I flipped him over my head and twisted the same arm again, wrenching it from the socket. Gray kicked him in the face to finish him off. A second explosion rocked the building, and I staggered into the wall to stay on my feet. That one was closer than I expected. Jig and Henson must be having trouble. 2, I said to myself, then shouted to the others, hurry up. We're out of time. As the building started to shake violently and fall down around us, all I could think was thank the gods Aiden wasn't here to be buried alive with the rest of us.
Chapter 5. Aiden. I paced back and forth in the pale glow of the truck's headlights. Iona and the others should have been to Timber Falls by now. Night had fallen hours ago, and I'd run out of buildings to check. The place was deserted and had been cleared out. Willow had been kind enough to provide us with provisions that would get us through the rest of winter, if not a bit longer. After glancing up at the moon and seeing how low it was in the sky, I cursed and placed my hands at my hips. "Where the hell are you?" I asked the night. I had no way to call Iona, and I didn't even know where HQ was. She'd purposely not told me, making sure I couldn't go after them. I'd been fine with it when I had confidence this plan of theirs would work. I had the driver's side door open and was about to climb in so I could start driving north and maybe run into them when headlights appeared in the distance. I slammed the car door shut and squinted, attempting to make out the vehicles in the dark. They looked like trucks, but it was too damn dark to see. When they parked on the outskirts of Timber Falls and doors flew open, a loud raucous of singing, horrible singing, assaulted my ears. Figures appeared as shadows in the yellow light behind them. They stood together in twos and threes, singing and cackling like madmen. I recognized the lyrics as war songs chanted by the Fighters Guild. When they came closer, the shortest figure amongst them broke ranks and rushed forward right into my arms. I barely opened them fast enough to catch Iona. She pressed her lips to mine and kissed me. Whistles came from the crowd gathered behind her, but at least the singing had stopped. Her face was covered in soot, as if she'd been through a fire. There were flecks of blood dotting her hands and cheeks, but overall she appeared to be unharmed. "You were starting to make me worry," I scolded. It was close. Henson and Jake nearly blew us all sky high. "There was a slight miscalculation," Jake said with a grimace. "It happens." "Yeah, when we're all inside the building trying to get out is not the time for a slight miss anything." Jake rolled his eyes at her. "You're alive, aren't you?" I counted the individuals and came up with way more than what they left with. "I take it your mission was more than a success then?" "Very much so." "Aiden," she said as a tall Phi separated from the pack, "I would like you to meet Xavier. He trained me. 3 more masters have also come with us." The Phi who held out his hand for mine bore more tattoos than Iona, but they were nearly identical. The skulls on his arm had been wrapped in a banner designating him a master of the guild. His gray eyes were hard, and his grip firm as he shook my hand. His short black hair threw me for a second. Most Phi kept their hair long. He didn't just appear as an old wise master. He was a general, and he was pissed off. "I've heard very little about you," Xavier said in a gravelly voice. "I would very much like to hear more." "There's plenty of room for everyone to get cleaned up and change," I told him as he released my hand. "The old community clinic is probably the best place to meet afterward." The community center burned to the ground. I shifted at the swell of anger that came with my words. I dug through the debris, and though there were no bodies, all I could see was the barn that had been destroyed on the farm. So many dead. Iona's hand slipped into mine. "Sounds like a plan. Lead the way, Aiden." A couple of hours later, Iona had showered and dressed in clean clothes. We were the last to reach the clinic. Mostly because I hadn't been able to stop reassuring myself that she had not died during this latest venture of hers. She was very much alive, and the tonic Tennyson made appeared to be working. She had no problems at all, and when we made it to the clinic, Jake and Henson confirmed it for me. The 4 of us, the 4 masters, Ray, Jolene, and a few select others, all sat down at tables we pushed together. Iona started talking, and hadn't stopped for over an hour as she told Xavier about the night Jarek was murdered, and all the events leading up to that very moment. He interrupted her a few times with questions, but other than that, let her speak. When she finished, the silence that fell over the room was like a blanket. Sound seemed muffled. A weird tingling started in my hands and spread throughout my body, as though hearing this whole catastrophe made me want to flee and pretend it wasn't really this bad. Yet here we were, sitting in the clinic where I treated numerous goblins over the years. Goblins that were now dead or in hiding. That thought sobered me. Mariana's secret war had already taken so much from me, from all of us, and this was only the beginning. She had the nerve to take over the Fighters Guild. What was next? The Healers Guild. Their HQ was located in neutral territory, just as Iona's guild was. Yet she'd managed to get her claws into them. Xavier, rising slowly, pulled me from my quickly darkening thoughts. He placed his palms on the table as he leaned forward. Mariana has declared war on her own people, he said with an edge to his words. As far as I'm concerned, as far as the remaining masters of the Fighters Guild are, she is guilty of various crimes including murder, genocide, and enslavement. In her move to take over the guild, she has crossed a line that we cannot ignore. The masters nodded in agreement, as did the fighters. Enjoy tonight, ladies and gentlemen, Xavier went on. For tomorrow morning at first light, the revolution begins. We'll send out the word to those fighters abroad, gather as many as we can, and bring them to back our cause. Mariana cannot be allowed to rule. Iona was the first to her feet, shouting in support. The rest followed, until there was only me. I hated violence. Hated taking lives, hated all of this. It went against my true nature, as someone who helped other living beings. But I would not let Iona face this war alone. Taking her hand, I stood and nodded to Xavier. His lips twitched in what I assumed was a smile. It settled then. Aiden, you got any booze in this place? I'm sure I can find some in the provisions Willow sent with us. I stepped away from the table. Never did I imagine I would be preparing for a revolution. This wouldn't be like the last few months of hoping to catch word of a convoy, or simply saving goblins from being taken away by Mariana's goons. This was going to be bloody. This was going to be a war. And there was no turning back. If I could only chase away my worries about what would kill Iona first, the venom or another Phi, this might turn out to be a very unforgettable night. Chapter 6. Aiden. My knees cramped as I crouched in the mud and rain, waiting for the signal. Winter had finally given way to spring, but it wasn't much of a relief. For the last 2 months we'd gone from freezing cold and blizzards to mid-50s and almost non-stop rain. I swiped my hand down my face again to clear away the water, but it didn't really matter. I shifted, and my boot sunk another few inches into the muck. What's taking so long? Henson muttered from my left. Damn good question. You think she got caught? Nah, she'd be making a hell of a lot of noise if she let herself be apprehended. Besides, Jig and Xavier are with her. I shrugged, not sure what else could be taking so long. I peered through the berry bushes at the encampment about 20 yards away. Lights had been strung on poles surrounding the perimeter of the camp. Phi patrolled the outskirts, but steered clear of the heavy underbrush where 20 of us were hidden away. Just waiting. Beyond the perimeter, red and black tents were pitched for the Phi. And beyond them were large corrals where they held their goblin troops. This wasn't the first camp we'd seen like this, but it didn't stop the flood of anger from pulsing through my veins at the sight. The goblins had metal collars around their necks, designating them as ones that couldn't be trusted off-leash yet, so to speak. There were others, sadly, who had given up any chance at being free and sworn loyalty to Mariana and Rayson. They weren't treated any better, not really. From what we picked up, they were allowed a bit more as far as food rations went, but were penned up when not on guard duty. They had to have a Phi commander with them at all times. There were stories of those who swore loyalty, then tried to escape. They were gunned down in minutes, their bodies left to rot as an example to others. In some cases, they killed whatever family the goblin had left. It sickened me, goblins giving in to Mariana's new regime, but Iona had told me I wasn't allowed to blame them for making that decision. Too many had died because they refused to join Mariana. Even more were killed because they tried to fight back. The branch I'd been tugging aside so I could see better snapped as an image of those mass graves flashed through my mind. Aiden. Sorry, I'm fine, I whispered to Henson. His grunt said he didn't believe me. The goblins in the corrals all turned toward the eastern side of the camp where the main entrance was. Henson readied his pistol as I braced to run in. I only ever had one job when we liberated camps, and that was freeing the goblins as quickly as I could and getting them under cover. I was armed with a pistol of my own, just in case. The first life I took with it had rubbed me the wrong way. Every life since hadn't affected me at all. The change was strange, but Iona said it was normal. Eventually, my deeds would catch up with me, but she swore she'd be right there to help me through whatever mental breakdown I finally had. Thanks to the tonic Tennyson had continually sent us, she had shown no symptoms of the Reaper venom at all. Hoping it had somehow cured her was too much to ask for, but I let myself do it anyway. Henson smacked my arm and pointed. The five were now rushing toward the east side of the camp, leaving the corrals lightly defended. A bell clanged, signaling they were under attack, and then all the five were running away, leaving the goblins alone. Now. Henson gave me a shove, and we sprinted into the encampment. The goblins backed away from the iron bars, until they saw me start working on the lock holding them captive. Henson and the fighters with me guarded my back while I picked the lock as quickly as I could. "You're them, aren't you?" a goblin said from behind bars. "If you mean the rebels, yeah, that'd be us." A chorus of cheers started. I told them to be quiet. "You can celebrate when we're out of here. For now, stay quiet, and as soon as I get this damn cage open, ha!" The lock clicked, and the door swung outward. "Into the trees straight that way. Do not get sidetracked. We have vehicles waiting for you. Hey." I whipped around in time to see a five fall to the ground dead, a bullet hole in his forehead. Henson stepped forward and picked off the next two five who appeared around the tents. "Get your ass moving, Aiden. Now." I urged the goblins out of corral until the first one was empty. There were two others filled with more. They stretched their arms through the bars and called to me, begging me to save them. Henson threw a glare over his shoulder as soon as I took off running. He shouted for me, but all I saw were people in need. A five stepped out from around a tent, and I decked him as hard as I could, then kept on running. A shot behind me told me someone finished him off. Two more appeared, but their backs were to me. Months ago, I wouldn't have even contemplated killing them. If I didn't kill them, then they'd try to kill me and possibly slaughter the goblins trying to escape. I drew the pistol from the holster, lined up my shots, and took them one after the other. The five bodies were still falling when Henson reached my side. "I see Iona's been teaching you how to shoot." I didn't stick around to chat. I hurried to get to the second corral. This lock was faster to pick since it was the same as the first one. Once the door was open, Henson directed the goblins toward the south side of the camp as I rushed to get to the last corral. Gunfire was constant. Henson shoved me to the side as bullets ricocheted off the bars. Several hit home, and the goblins still trapped ducked for cover. "We can't stay," Henson snapped, and threw me ahead of him away from the corral. "I'm not leaving them." "You don't have a choice. Something's gone wrong." He pressed his finger to his ear, getting a message from another fighter over the comms. "I'm sorry, Aiden. There's no time." He grabbed my shoulder and dragged me along with him as the goblins screamed and shouted for mercy. I tore myself free of Henson's hold and was halfway back to the corral when Jig tackled me to the ground. His face was darkened with camouflage paint, and there was blood on his hands. "You heard Henson, move it." I kept fighting, and the last thing I saw before the shadows took over was Jig's fist colliding with my face. When I came to, Iona's furious yelling assaulted my ears. It was followed immediately by Xavier's. My eyes opened to get my bearings. From what I could tell, we had left the camp, but we hadn't returned to Timber Falls yet. 4 trucks were parked haphazardly beside one another on a dirt road. The foliage was thick, from what I could make out in the darkness of night. I climbed out the passenger seat I'd been dropped into and stumbled forward a few steps, holding my sore jaw. Jig and Henson didn't even glance my way when I stood level with them. They were too fixated on Iona and Xavier, who were shouting. "You nearly blew the entire mission," Xavier snapped, as Iona crossed her arms and glowered back like she was ready to kill him. "Do you have any idea what you nearly did?" "Yeah, I nearly killed the asshole who poisoned me," she ranted. "No, you nearly got yourself and everyone else killed because you're blinded by your need for revenge. I taught you better than this." "I know I did. Don't you dare throw lessons and bullshit training at me." Iona was a foot plus shorter than Xavier, but at that moment, she was the more intimidating figure. I felt her raw anger as she stared her old master down. She pointed a finger at him as she seethed. "Don't you ever stop me from killing him again. Or next time, I'll take you down too." She turned on her heel and stormed away. Xavier ordered everyone back to their trucks. I followed Iona and climbed into the passenger side when she got behind the wheel. She didn't even look at me as she started the engine, floored it in reverse, sending dirt and rocks flying, then spun the wheel sharply and plowed down a dirt path that barely looked passable. "What happened back there?" I asked after 5 minutes of complete silence. "Iona." "Nothing." "Don't give me that shit," I muttered as the events of the night caught up with me. One of the corrals, I hadn't been able to get the lock picked, which meant those goblins were still back there trapped. For all we knew, the Fae would kill them in retaliation for us rescuing their kin. "Talk to me and tell me, why is Xavier so pissed off at you?" She made a harsh left, and I slid into the door with a grunt. I deviated from the plan. "Is that why it took so long for the signal to come?" I blinked and frowned. "I never saw you give it." "Because I didn't." "Why not?" She pressed the accelerator to the floor, and then we were on the blacktop. She didn't answer my question the next 2 times I asked, so I gave up. The tension grew between us until I wanted to get out of the truck just to break it. My jaw ached from Jig punching me. I'd have to get him back later. Eventually, we reached the shimmering dome, protecting Timber Falls from being discovered as our home base. Xavier and the 3 masters twisted the magic the Fae used to keep humans from stumbling on our communities, and made it so Fae that did not bear the mark could not enter the dome or see what was beyond it. Timber Falls had practically been removed from the map. I ran my fingers over the small skull tattoo that marked the inside of my right wrist. It didn't go with the healer marks I bore, but it was necessary. The skull gave a subtle blue glow as we pierced the dome. If we did not have the mark, we would have ended up driving in the other direction, not even certain why we'd been out here. Iona threw the truck into park a couple of minutes later, when we reached the farmhouse we'd taken as our own at the end of the lane. I expected her to stop back on Main Street so we could help deal with the new goblins we rescued. They were being housed in the old shop fronts wherever there was room. Timber Falls had turned into a military base these last 2 months. Barbed wire fences with watchtowers marked the perimeter, in case anyone did break through the dome's magic. The department store had been turned into an armory. Patrols kept watch around the clock. Here, we had more than enough room to keep bringing the liberated goblins. Here, we might be able to keep them safe and not be burned alive until we smuggled them to safety across Charas's borders. Iona was on the front porch by the time I caught up with her. "Talk to me," I said as I prevented her from going inside. "Just tell me what happened at the camp." She shoved me aside and stormed into the house, flipping on lights as she went. "You want to know what happened?" She removed her leather trench coat and chucked it on the couch. "Vencal and that blonde bitch of his were there. They were there tonight, and Xavier stopped me from killing them. They were at the camp." "That's what I said." She sank on the couch and held her face in her hand. "I could have killed him tonight. He could be dead, but Xavier said to stick to the damn plan. He has no idea what he's done." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "You don't?" "What?" "Iona, we make plans for a reason. I know you want Vencal dead, but because you didn't stick to the plan, we left goblins behind." She straightened, her dark eyes narrowed. "You're saying you don't want Vencal dead too?" "Gods, no. And don't you dare try to put those words in my mouth. I want him dead just as much as you do. I want to capture him so we can ensure the venom is eradicated from your blood, but you can't just go after him without a plan." She shot to her feet and marched toward me. "If we kill him, Mariana loses one of her generals. Do you have any idea what that would mean for this war?" "Yes, I do, but at what cost?" She threw her arms up and shouted in aggravation. "You messed up tonight. Admit it." "I did nothing wrong. Xavier did. He's the one that caused the plan to go to shit." "You're not perfect," I told her sternly. "You messed up, and you cost goblins their lives. They might not be dead by morning, but they'll still be slaves. Don't you dare stand there and put the weight of their fate on me." "Don't," she warned. "Right, because you still think you have to win this war alone. After all this time, no matter how much we talk about it, you can't just accept that everyone is here to help you." The night caught up with me in those few seconds, and I was exhausted. Iona might be doing better physically, but mentally, she was continually finding ways to make her life far more difficult than it needed to be. "We will get Vencal, but we'll do it with a proper plan. We'll do it together. Or I could have just done it tonight." I laughed sadly and backed away. "You know what? You want to go after Vencal, blinded by your rage and your need for vengeance, go for it. I'm not going to keep fighting you on this." "Aiden," she called loudly, but I kept walking. "We signed on to fight a revolution. Some of us are still trying to do that. When you decide you want to throw all your effort into it, you know where to find me." I walked upstairs to the room we'd been sharing and shut the door. The minutes dragged by, but she didn't come after me. That was fine by me. The screams of the goblins we left behind resounded inside my head as I stripped out of my soaked and muddy clothes and threw on a pair of sleep pants. I sat on the edge of the bed, but the exhaustion I felt downstairs was gone, replaced by frustration caused by Iona's stubbornness. Not a chance I'd fall asleep easily now. When we first left Brier, right after Iona brought the fighters from the guild HQ, we worked out a plan to bring Mariana down. Our numbers were small, so we had to start small. The plan made sense, and Iona had been on board. Or she had been, in the beginning. But as the weeks went by, and we harassed supply lines or liberated goblins, none of it seemed to make a dent in Mariana's plans, not in a way that we could see. Nor did it get us any closer to killing Vencal. I'd watched the anger build in her eyes each time we came back from a mission, and Vencal hadn't been there. Worse were the times like tonight when he had been, but getting to him would be impossible. She'd nearly killed him at their last encounter. As much as she wanted to kill him, though, we needed him alive for a little while. He was the only one who could give us the exact antidote needed to save her life. Somehow, she continued to forget that. My speeches about having faith no longer seemed to have any effect on her. The words of the deity plagued her mind. More than once she jerked herself awake from a nightmare and looked at me with lost cold eyes. Bit by bit, I was losing Iona to this war. By the end, I feared how much of her would be left, if any. I paced around the bedroom, then went to stare out the windows. They faced the heart of Timber Falls that was always lit and filled with activity these days. Lightning streaked across the sky, spider-webbing into the distance. Thunder rumbled a few seconds after. Rain pattered against the glass, soft at first, then grew heavy until it blocked my sight. I hung my head, resting it against the window pane. Iona's mood was not helped by the fact that our bi-weekly reports to the Light Phi Kingdoms did little to sway their decision not to confront the Dark Phi Kingdoms. They were too afraid to even set up a meeting to discuss the atrocities. It shouldn't surprise me. As kind and compassionate as the Light Phi were, they had little taste for war or any sort of confrontation. They liked to live in their happy little worlds and pretend that's how it was outside their borders. The idiots wouldn't act unless Mariana marched her army of goblin slaves into Light Phi territory, and by then, it'd be too late to stop them. Because by then, it would mean we had failed. If I shut my eyes hard enough, I could picture the future Iona described to me. If she would just stick to the path we chose to take, we could be together on that front porch. We could have that peaceful, quiet life. We could outlast the darkness brought to Charus by two cold-hearted, evil Phi. The floor creaked behind me. There was no need to turn around. Iona's intensity flooded the room, but there was no anger there. Her arms wrapped around my waist, and she pressed her face to my back. She breathed in deeply, then let it out. "How do you always smell like that?" "Like what?" I asked curiously. "Like fresh herbs and wood smoke. Like you've been standing around a bonfire all day." "Guess I'm just good like that." She let out another heavy breath, and slowly I tugged her around to face me. I tilted her chin up and looked into those dark eyes that I could get lost in. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I know I haven't made any of this easy, but every time I see that bastard, I just want to rip his heart out." "I know. His time will come though, I'm sure of it." "Not freaking soon enough," she pouted as I laughed quietly. "We'll go back to the camp tomorrow and save the rest of the goblins. I never should have messed up the plan tonight." "You were right. For once." Her brow knitted together. "I want you to keep calling me out on my shit. No matter how hard I push back, don't let me screw up our chance." I drew her into my arms and kissed her forehead. "Promise. But you know, if you would just have faith as the deity told you, and as I tell you." "Aiden," she interrupted. "Yeah. Just shut up and kiss me." I lowered my head. She molded against my body. "I've got you," I whispered to her. "I'll always have you, Iona. Always." I rested my cheek against the top of her head. Xavier stood in the armory, checking over what appeared to be the weapons confiscated from last night's raid. Iona walked ahead of me, and right up to him. He didn't even look up as she approached. Xavier continued to clean the current rifle in his hands, as if we weren't even there. Iona cringed as she took a few more steps closer. She looked like she'd been sent to the principal's office, and I hid a smirk as I turned away for a second. Iona cleared her throat, but Xavier took no notice. She did it louder, and the old Phi's brow twitched. "I know you're busy this morning," Iona finally said, "but you're right about last night. I came to apologize for being a pain in the ass." Xavier set the rifle aside and looked her square in the eye. "From the minute I took you under my wing, I knew you'd be a pain in the ass. It's why I trained you myself. Why I was so damned hard on you. If I'm perfectly honest, yes, you made a mistake last night, but Iona, I'm damn proud of you, girl." "Thank you, Xavier." "Right. Jake has picked up some chatter on a supply line heading south." "Actually, we need to go back to the camp we were at last night," Iona told him. "We didn't finish our mission, and you always taught me to never leave loose ends. Tell Jig and the others. The supply line can wait one more day." Iona nodded and went to leave him when he said her name. "If we catch wind of Vencal, and there's a chance we can take him out successfully, I will not keep the intel from you. You have my word, Iona, but you cannot do as you did last night. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir." "And your symptoms?" Iona's shoulders tensed at his question, and I sensed her sudden shift in mood. "None so far." Xavier's gaze slid to me, and I bowed my head in confirmation of her words. The master's eye twitched, but he waved us away. "Good, get going then." Once we were out on the main street listening to thunder rumble in the distance from the storm that had carried on into the morning hours, I caught Iona's hand. "You're not having any issues, right? You tell me." Her eyes were clear and bright. I hadn't noticed her taking too long to respond to me or anyone else who spoke with her. My hand slipped from her arm to her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Feel that?" "I promise I'm fine. Whatever tonic Tennyson gave me seems to be working. Giving me the time I need. Stop worrying, Aiden. With any luck, it'll knock the venom out of my system completely." She grinned as she added cheekily, "Think you could learn a thing or two from this goblin?" "You think? He's about 20 levels over me." I'll never get that high up in the yard. You will if we can ever stop this war. And we will, she said sternly as she stood on her toes and gently brushed her lips against mine. Come on. We have goblins to save and supply lines to screw with.
Chapter 7. Iona. I tugged the hat down lower over my eyes as we climbed out of the Camaro. Aiden adjusted his jacket a few times, not used to having a holster at his side. Will you stop? I scolded. You're going to give yourself away. I don't know why we're even doing this. Our faces are on wanted posters, Iona. Yeah, and? I glanced up and down the sidewalk of 5th Street in the small town of Aberdeen. It was fairly busy, but not overcrowded. At least we hadn't drawn the short straw to hit up the few Phi blocks in Denver. We were, however, surrounded by Phi, who, as far as our intel was concerned, were in full support of Queen Mariana's new regime. The only reason we ventured out of Timber Falls was to gather information on the Queen and her right-hand man, Vencal. The Queen was easy enough to track down. She was currently residing with her husband in the capital of Jolian. According to the tabloids, there were hints they were making plans to welcome a new baby within the first year of their marriage. The sources Xavier had managed to sneak in close to the Queen told us they were making plans for the first wave of assaults against the Light Phi Kingdom of Honeysuckle. It was the smallest of the 3 Light Phi kingdoms, and would be easy enough to overwhelm. We'd captured several Phi commanders over the last 2 weeks, but none of them said the same thing about what Mariana was plotting to do next. And not a single one knew where Vencal was. Our spies hadn't been able to track him down since the last encampment we raided. I didn't want to say it aloud, but in my head, I blamed Xavier for not simply letting me go after the assassin when I had him in my sights. Aiden sidled closer as we meandered down the street toward the neon lights of a bar called the Down and Outs. I didn't think too much on the name or why anyone would want to go in there for a drink, but lucky for us, we did hear rumor of the blonde Phi being spotted here. If anyone knew where Vencal had disappeared to, it'd be her. Strange really that Vencal seemed to have some sort of relationship with this Phi. I always assumed he and Mariana were carrying on behind poor Prince Rayson's back. They were both master manipulators. I wondered which one would end up killing off the other one in the end. Vencal only needed Mariana for her title, and she needed him for his killing skills. Eventually, there would be no reason to have them both around. I smiled, picturing them turning on each other. With any luck, it'd never get that far because I'd be the one to stab Vencal in the heart with my dagger just as he had killed Jarek and nearly done to Aiden. I hadn't decided yet how I'd kill Mariana, but she'd die by my hand one way or another. If we could ever get close enough to her. The men we had watching her weren't skilled assassins, only spies. She was heavily guarded night and day, and never stayed anywhere but a fortified location. For now, she was off limits. Aiden nudged me, and I glanced up to find we were standing beneath the large red and white neon sign for the bar. We walked in, picked out a table in the corner that would give us a good view of the whole place, and sat down. A waitress came by, a bosomed Phi with blue hair and skimpy clothes. She gave Aiden a hungry look as she pressed herself right against his side. I coughed to hide my laugh as he ordered 2 whiskeys, his words catching a bit as his cheeks turned 3 shades of red. She bent over lower, and she asked if he wanted anything else. I'd have to ask her what she wore beneath that shirt, to keep her boobs from tumbling out into Aiden's face. Just the whiskey, I said when Aiden couldn't seem to find the words, doing his best to avert his gaze. The waitress pouted, not even giving me a second of her time, then turned away with a huff. I smirked as Aiden shook his head, then scowled at me. What? I think she likes you. Not every day you see a sexy silver-haired Phi. This is why I never went out. You saying you're a ladies' man? He shrugged as he winked, and took my gloved hand on the bench between us. Something like that. Ah, then I feel very lucky you're with me. His pale green eyes darkened a hint as his gaze wandered over my face. Aiden's lips curled in a grin as he closed the distance between us, put his arm around my shoulders and leaned in for a kiss. The waitress returned with our drinks. Aiden paid and she left us alone, but not before glaring right at me. Usually, I would have glowered right back until she scampered away out of fright, but being a wanted half-breed meant I had to keep myself in check. The hat was to cover my overly pointed ears, peeking out through my hair that was currently pulled back as tight as I could get it. I wore gloves to hide my black claws. The lighting in the bar was dim enough, no one should notice the slight gray tinge to my skin. "See her yet?" Aiden asked, after we'd been sitting there for 20 minutes or so watching the crowd grow larger as the night wore on. "Lots of blondes, but none of them are her." I finished off my whiskey and slid the glass to the middle of the table. I longed to shrug out of the leather jacket and take off the hat. My head ached from my hair being pulled back so tightly, but didn't dare do any of that. We weren't exactly drawing attention, but I sensed eyes on us the entire time. We weren't regulars, so we were an oddity in this place. Maybe it was a different bar. No, this is the one they saw her at. The back bar matches the pictures. He rested against the wall and let his arm drape casually over my shoulders. I leaned into his side automatically, soaking in the comfort his presence always gave me. Wood smoke filled my nose, chasing away the harsh stench of body odor and booze that filled the bar. If I didn't think too hard, I could imagine us like any normal couple out for a night of drinks and fun. This was not the place I'd choose, but it could be worse for our first official date. "What are you grinning about?" he asked, glancing down at me with those eyes that always saw so much. "Just enjoying our date." "Date?" He laughed as he shook his head, but his hand drew me in closer. "I'd take you somewhere a hell of a lot better than this place for a date. I hope you know that." "What? The late-night bar crowd isn't really your scene?" "Ah, no, it's not." "Date?" he said again, and a smile crept across his face too. We sat like that for a long while, content to be with each other. I easily tuned out the noise of the bar and focused on Aiden's steady breathing, the feel of his heart beating almost in time with mine. The rest of the messed-up world just fell to the wayside, and it was only the two of us. I glanced across the bar and spotted a red-headed fye with a beard. "Have you seen Jarek at all?" I whispered. "Wandering around Timber Falls?" Aiden opened his mouth, closed it, then frowned. "I haven't, not since we went to the lab facility." "Have you?" "No, nothing." "Are you okay with that?" "Yeah, I am." I just wondered if he'd finally moved on. Probably for the best he's not here to see, just in case we fail. I said it lightly, but it shattered the comfortable atmosphere. I tapped my gloved fingers on the table and wondered why I'd even brought up Jarek in the first place. I meant it when I said I was fine with not seeing him any longer. I knew now my place was with Aiden. What I had with him was real. It was just right and complete. As if sensing what I was thinking, Aiden gently turned me to face him. He leaned down and kissed me softly, letting his lips linger against mine as he hugged me to him. When we parted, he was smiling warmly. A couple of minutes later, after we'd put some space between us on the bench to remind ourselves we were here for a reason, the waitress walked by and picked up my empty glass, still only looking at Aiden. He asked for 2 more whiskeys. "I have an idea," I told him quietly, noting 2 large fye decked out in black leather standing at the end of the bar. They kept glancing at me over their shoulders. I ignored them and my instincts and focused on completing our mission. "And judging from the look on your face, I'm not going to like it," Aiden muttered. "What is it?" "Flirt with the waitress." Aiden blinked 3 times, then pressed his hand to my forehead beneath the hat. "You feeling all right?" "I'm not sick, and no, I don't exactly want you to, but she works here. She might know about the blonde fye. You can use that. After all, you're a ladies' man, aren't you?" I added with a wink. Never should have said that. Too late now. "Look, I'll duck into the restroom and give you a bit of space. And stop yourself from punching her in the process." "Got it." I scooted out of the booth. "You remembered the description I gave you?" "Yeah, now shoo. Let a man work." I stifled a laugh, but hurried away from our table and down the short hall to the restrooms. I had to pass by the end of the bar, and the two burly Phi on my way. Their heads went together as I passed, but they remained where they were, nursing their bottled beers. I walked slowly, wanting to give Aiden enough time to get his flirt on. I washed my hands, and once I was certain the bathroom was empty except for me, I removed my hat and let my hair down. I rubbed my sore scalp, and willed Aiden to be successful so we could get the hell out of this place and back home. I splashed water on my face and pictured that waitress plopping herself on Aiden's lap. Poor guy was going to have a fit if she went too far. A slight pang of jealousy pricked my chest, but it went away quick enough. At the end of the night, Aiden was with me, and that waitress would find some other Phi to hit on for a big tip. Hell, if she gave us the intel we needed, I'd leave her a nice chunk of change. I tugged my hair back into another tight bun, replaced my hat, and exited the bathroom. I stayed back in the hall, sticking to the shadows, and peered around the corner. Aiden was talking with the waitress, who was indeed sitting on his lap. She had one arm wrapped around his neck, and she was smiling at him like the trained seductress she was. Her wild gaze darting around the bar, though, was anything but excited that Aiden was flirting with her. Whatever she was telling him, she must have been worried about someone overhearing. Maybe tonight wouldn't be a waste after all. The waitress suddenly hopped off his lap, giggled loudly, and sauntered away, swaying her hips. Aiden's smile was fake, as he remained at the table watching the crowd. I took that as my cue, and exited the hall. The two big Phi had shifted down a bit, and were talking to three more. All five of them watched me pass by, then huddled together. We couldn't linger much longer. Well? I asked Aiden as I returned to the table. Blonde one was here last night, he told me. Waitress wasn't too keen to talk about her at first, but I may or may not have hinted that we worked for Vencal and needed to get a message out. Smart move? It was sort of. She hadn't seemed to believe me at first, but then I showed her the tiny skull mark on my wrist. Guess she thought I was part of the Fighters Guild. She told me the blonde one had come in here last night, pissed off, because Vencal left her behind to guard Queen Mariana while he was away. Away doing what? I don't know, but the waitress said it sounded like he would be out of the Dark Phi Kingdoms, out of the country. Might not be back for a few weeks. Shit, I whispered and shifted my gaze to the five Phi at the bar who were now staring right at us. He's recruiting. What do you mean? Aiden asked, then I saw him lift his head. And why are they staring at us like that? I mean, Vencal is abroad, speaking to the other Dark Phi Kingdoms. I shifted on the bench, so I had easier access to the knife tucked at my lower back. And they're staring at us because I think they know who I am. Tonight's about to get fun. We're not supposed to be seen, remember? Yeah, I do, but it's not like we have a choice. The Phi were only a few yards away from our table now, and more of the bar's patrons were turning to look at us. The waitress had left another round of whiskeys on the table, and I shot mine back, flipped the glass over, and stood. Just stay behind me if you can, I muttered to Aiden. Sure, yeah. No problem. With the whiskey warming me, I stepped around to the front of the table and the bar went utterly silent. Help you with something? I asked, shoving my hands in my back pockets as I did. The Phi weren't heavily armed, not that I could see anyway. From the looks of their bare arms, none of them were part of the guild. Yeah, how about you take off your hat? A large Phi with beady dark brown eyes said as he stalked closer. He had a good 2 feet on me, but I'd taken down bigger ones than him. He flexed his biceps as he crossed his arms and glowered down at me. Think I'll keep it on, thanks. We don't take too kindly to your kind around here. He spat at my feet as the Phi behind him cackled and leered. Take it off, or I'll do it for you. Don't want any trouble, boys. We'll just be on our way. How's that sound? The only place you're going is to the guard. We know who you are. Aiden pushed to his feet and stomped up beside me. Watch it. The Phi's brow rose, but he clearly wasn't intimidated by Aiden's anger. What are you going to do about it, little man? We've got you outnumbered. You're both going to come with us, so we can all have a nice payday. You can do it quietly, or we can knock you out. The Phi beside Beady Eyes punched his palm with his fist. Up to you. Oh, I'm trembling in my boots, I mocked. Seriously? That's the best you got? Beady Eyes looked around the bar. You ain't getting out of here in one piece. Correction, I'm getting out of here without you being in one piece. Who wants to get their ass kicked first? The loud sound of a deadbolt sliding home echoed around the bar. 2 Phi took up places near the front door, our only way out. Aiden cursed, but I smiled. When was the last time I had a good brawl? That's exactly what this fight was about to become. I was going to tell Aiden to take a seat and just keep his head down when a Phi to my right lunged forward with a pool cue. He aimed for my stomach, but I caught it and yanked him right into my fist. He crashed back into his friends as I tore the cue from his hands. 2 more Phi came at me, their fists ready. I whacked one in the face with the heavy end of the cue, then broke it on the head of the second. 2 hands grabbed my shoulders and swung me around into the crowd of Phi. The hat fell from my head and my hair came loose. Told you it was her, Beady Eyes shouted. Grab her. I laughed as I pitched the broken end of the pool cue at him, then threw myself wholeheartedly into the fight. Aiden shouted my name, and I spotted his head of silver hair before he was lost in the mass of leather-clad bodies straining to get their hands on me. I grabbed a female by the arm and flung her to my right, taking down 2 more that had been ready to pounce. It helped that most of these idiots were drunk. I bashed 2 more in the face, then threw myself onto the back of Beady Eyes. I wrapped my arms as tight as I could around his neck, as he spun around and around, trying to knock me off. He threw me into the bar. I flipped over the counter just as he crashed into it, trying to smash me. He grunted in pain, and I grabbed the closest bottle I could get my hands on, then smashed it over his head. It shattered, but he stayed conscious, so I grabbed another one and did the same. When I was on the 4th bottle, I took a swig of the dark whiskey, then threw it right at his face. That made him howl in pain, and he went down as his buddies took his place. I climbed atop the bar, kicking Phi in the face. Across the bar, Aiden had climbed atop one of the tables and held a broken chair in his hands. Despite the situation we were in, the man was laughing and cursing like this was the best night of his life. He caught my eye and waved, until a Phi with bright pink hair grabbed his ankles and took him down. He disappeared, and I leaped into the crowd to get to him. I left a trail of unconscious and fleeing Phi in my wake. Tables splintered as I slammed bodies onto them. Chairs shattered against backs. 1 Phi got a lucky hit at my face, but I put him in a headlock, then kicked him headfirst into a wall. He went through the sheetrock and stayed there. I scrambled to grab Aiden's arm and hauled him to his feet. We pressed our backs to each other as the few Phi left, including Beady Eyes, closed in around us. Did you have to go and piss them off even more? Aiden asked, hoisting his fists as if ready to go a few rounds. What? They started it. You too, Beady Eyes shouted, you are not getting out of here. This should be the time when you give up, I told him. Look around. Do you see any chance of getting out of this? She's mine. He raised his hands like he wanted to strangle me, then charged forward. I shoved Aiden out of the way and took the hit from Beady Eyes. My back smacked into the wall, knocking the air from my lungs. I ducked as a meaty fist flew at my face and jabbed the sucker in the abdomen and kidneys. He sank to his knees. I bashed my knee under his chin next, and blood spurted from his mouth. He didn't go down yet, and I did it again and again, punching him and waiting for him to pass out. I couldn't tell if he was really just that drunk or just doused in the booze I'd hit him with. Just when I was starting to get tired and Beady Eyes began to clamber to his feet for another round, a glass bottle shattered on the back of his head. The large Phi went cross-eyed, and finally collapsed face-first on the floor. Aiden stood behind him, holding the broken bottleneck. Ready to go now? He asked as he tossed it aside. Yeah, sure, why not? I think the party's over. I limped toward him. I'd feel like shit tomorrow, probably be black and blue too. When I reached for Aiden's hand, the 5 remaining Phi moved toward us, but Aiden was faster. The pistol caught the varying colors of neon lights around the bar as he slowly swung it around. The Phi raised their hands and backed off. Might want to spread the word, I told the Phi. You mess with us, Aiden here will kick your asses. His lips twitched, and then we were backing toward the front door. I unlocked it, and we slipped outside. He holstered his pistol, as we took off at a dead sprint down the sidewalk to the Camaro. I doubted they'd be stupid enough to follow us, but I'd been wrong before. You sure know how to show a guy a good time, he said once he slid behind the wheel. What can I say? I aimed to please. You want to hear the rest of what the waitress told me.
Chapter 8. Aiden. I folded up the letter from Tennyson and tucked it back in the box he'd sent. The goblins we left in Brier had fully recovered. Tennyson had even taken it upon himself to send batches of the antidote to all the goblin communities that remained in Charuz and Jolian. There weren't many, and they were heavily guarded. Something told me he'd find a way to see they received what they required. Aside from Vencal leaving the country and there no sign of him for the last few weeks, all our missions had been successful. Our army grew by the day. Not only were we bringing in the goblins we liberated, who were willing to fight against Queen Mariana and King Rayson, but Phi were joining our ranks, those who stood against tyranny and enslavement. Xavier and the Masters had put out the word as soon as they joined us, and fighters had been showing up in droves. Our fortified city was quickly becoming overcrowded. I'd never seen Iona so filled with hope that we might have a chance at winning this war after all. I unpacked the package from Tennyson. Most of it was tonic for Iona. The rest were supplies to restock the clinic for injuries inflicted during the encampment raids. Many of the supply lines had to be redirected because of our harassment. We'd upped the number of eyes watching the Queen, and the blonde Phi we learned was called V. Just V. A small group of fighters who had come in heard us talking about her, and immediately told us all they knew. She wasn't in the guild. They rejected her, but Vencal had taken her in under his tutelage. From what they could tell, he loved the woman, and she was unfailingly loyal to him. When Iona heard that part, she'd grin darkly and wouldn't meet my gaze when I asked her what she planned. She wanted to make Vencal pay, make them both pay, but despite how well the revolution was going, I feared one of these days Iona would be pushed over that line and lose a part of herself. The fighting and killing finally caught up with me a few nights ago. I'd woken up drenched in a cold sweat and shaking. Iona had stirred behind me, and as soon as she wrapped her arms around me, my head had fallen forward, and I'd wept for the lives I'd stolen. I wondered when it would hit you, she'd murmured. You're not a bad person, Aiden. This is war. It's not an excuse. No, but it's a reason. She'd moved around, so she sat on my lap, held my face in her hands, and looked me right in the eye. I want it to affect you. The moment it stops bothering you, that's when you know you've lost a bit of yourself. I don't want it to ever stop making you feel this way. What about you? She'd shrugged. What about me? Has it stopped affecting you? Her already black eyes had glimmered in the face of my question. No, not even close. My nightmares are just as bad as yours, if not worse. I've just learned how to deal with them. She'd held me, and eventually I drifted back to sleep. We'd grown so much closer over these past months, Iona and me. She let me see when she was worried or sad. There was no more guessing about what she might be thinking. I could tell by the subtle shift of her feet, or the twitch of her lip, or the way her eyes would lighten and darken, depending on how the day was going. She found my training highly amusing most of the time, but I was getting better at holding my own against her, Jig, and Henson. Lightly, I ran my fingers over the healer markings on my arm. They were still there. They hadn't been corrupted yet. With any luck, they never would be. Our spies reported Mariana appeared to be growing more paranoid by the day. She'd upped the security at the royal grounds in Charuz, and hardly left the palace anymore. We hadn't attacked the royal convoys or those of the council, but plans were in the works to start making them understand we were here to stay. The revolution would be ongoing until Mariana surrendered her throne to the people. That wasn't to say we hadn't lost soldiers. We had, but the guerrilla tactics we employed kept our losses low. I finished unpacking the box and glanced out the front windows of the farmhouse. Snow in freaking April. You gotta be kidding me. I walked toward the window, boots hitting the floor in the silence of the house. The temperatures had plummeted this week as a freak change in weather blew in across the countryside. They said we were going to get snow, but I hadn't believed them. There had to be a good 2 or 3 inches already coating the fields we hadn't found time to plant yet. Iona was resting upstairs. She returned from a mission in the early hours of the morning, shivering from being out in the cold and soaked to the bone. They'd taken out another supply line, but the fight had ended with several of them being thrown into a nearby river. I'd helped her get cleaned up, then tucked her into bed. She'd seemed a bit off as I'd left her to sleep, but I assumed it was just because she was exhausted. Iona. I opened the bedroom door and peered inside. The bed was empty. She wasn't in the bathroom either, or anywhere upstairs. Her boots were by the front door, where she'd kicked them off this morning. I called her name as I wandered through the house. I passed by the living room windows, paused and turned. What are you doing out there? I grabbed my coat off the hook by the front door and trudged out into the snow. Iona stood leaning against the trunk of an old oak that grew near the house. Aiden. Decided you needed some fresh air? I asked as I stood behind her. She shrugged but didn't turn to face me. Something like that. I just woke up and was confused. Bad dreams? I'm not sure. I rested my hand on her shoulder, and she stiffened then relaxed. Sorry. I'm a bit on edge. She sniffed hard. I just need a minute, promise. Was she crying? Slowly, I tried to turn her toward me, but she resisted. Brow furrowing, I gave up and simply walked around to face her. The second she lifted her eyes to mine, I cursed and held her face in my hands. Iona, your eyes. She sniffed again as tears shimmered in eyes that were no longer black, but completely fogged over. They couldn't find my face to focus on, and I carefully swiped away the few tears that fell. I woke up and I couldn't see, she whispered as she trembled. There's nothing, Aiden. Nothing but darkness. Her hands fumbled until they found my arms. Then she clung to me as she shook her head. Why? The tonic was working. I know, I said as my heart plummeted. I guess it was too much to ask that it kept working a bit longer. I was about to pull her into my arms when my eyes slipped to her feet in the snow. Her bare feet. She shivered again, and I quickly scooped her into my arms and drew her in close to my chest. Didn't you feel the snow? I asked the second we were inside. No. She sucked in a deep breath, then more tears streamed down her cheeks as she curled against me. Aiden. It's going to be fine, I said firmly as I carried her upstairs to the bathroom. I ran the water at room temperature and began working on warming up her freezing cold skin. Thankfully, she hadn't been out there too long, but if I hadn't gone to look for her, no. I wasn't going to think about that. I helped her out of her clothes and eased her into the water. She cursed and dug her claws into my arms, but I took the pain. Every few seconds, I glanced at her eyes, but there was no change. They were fogged over. She squeezed my hand, as if it was the only thing keeping her alive. What if it doesn't come back this time? She whispered, voice quaking with fear. Don't you dare think that. We'll fix this, Iona. I'll fix it. Vencal is not going to win. Not now when we're so bloody close to beating them. Are we? Yes, we are. Have faith, remember. She laughed sadly as she sank lower in the tub. Hard to do that when no matter what we do, I'm still dying. Her words tugged at my heart, but there was nothing I could say that would change reality. She was dying. All we did was slow it down. Or maybe we hadn't. Maybe all we'd been doing was masking the symptoms, and now they were coming back with a vengeance. How bad is it? I glanced up the stairs at the farmhouse, then scrubbed a hand down my face. Worse than ever. She's sleeping now. Henson's jaw clenched as he paced to the bottom of the stairs. I thought the tonic was working. It has been. Or we thought it was. Did she seem off during the mission last night? A bit, Jake answered for Henson when he remained silent. But she had taken a hit to the head, and then the dunk in the river. We just thought it was from the fight. I'd gone to find Henson and Jig to update them on her current situation. They'd been in a meeting with Xavier a few minutes before and said they had news, but mine was more important and worse. Is there anything you can do for her? Henson asked. I can go back to the remedies I used before, but I'm worried that might speed up the venom. What do you mean? Jig was on his feet as he stormed toward me. What do you mean, Aiden? I'm saying Tennyson's tonic did a hell of a job hiding what was happening to her all this time, I snapped as I jumped to my feet. I'm saying when we thought we were helping her, we might have actually been harming her. Whatever time she probably had for us to save her is running out fast. Then do something about it, Jig yelled. Save her. What the hell do you think I've been doing? I shouted back. Unless you can produce Vencal here and now and make him give her the antidote, I can't do shit. Don't you think that's killing me right now? I stomped away from him, running my hands through my hair. I don't know if I can save the woman I love, and it's tearing me apart. If she dies, it's on me. Iona was upstairs being eaten alive by that venom, and I was powerless to stop it. This was the nightmare I'd been having for months, and hadn't told her, hadn't told anyone. Not that she'd be killed in a fight. That the venom would get her in the end, because I wasn't a good enough healer to save her. We might be able to do just that, Henson said slowly. Do what? I frowned as I spun around. Vencal, we just got word today that he's back in Charus, Jig explained. He's been spotted at the royal grounds with Mariana. Great, the one place we can't attack without losing a ton of our own people. The royal grounds was too heavily guarded. Half of the army was encamped there. Even with the growing numbers we had, it'd be a bloodbath. No one was willing to lose so many lives in order to lay siege on the throne. Not yet. Maybe not, but there's more. Henson seemed uncertain. His gaze shifted to the stairs and continued. There's a rumor going around that Mariana is planning to meet with whoever Vencal brought back with him. Meeting where? At the encampment to the northeast of Dagger Mountain, tomorrow, Jig said. They'll both be there at the same time. Granted, it'll be at the camp. We have enough men to take it, which means there's a chance we can successfully attack and capture Mariana and Vencal. I looked from one to the other, waiting for them to tell me the rest of the plan. When they didn't, I snapped, And what? I scoffed at Henson. Why aren't you preparing to go there and surround the camp? Because there's a high probability it's a trap, Henson said. This wasn't some secretive plan they laid out. It was announced. Why would they do that now, unless they wanted to draw us out and attack? They're after the masters, Iona, and you. They're setting themselves up as bait. If we go, we could be walking into an ambush. Then we're doing nothing. Until we have more intel, we stay here. And miss our chance, I yelled at Jig. You've got to be kidding me. Aiden, we get you're frustrated, but are you willing to risk innocent lives on the off chance they are there? Yes, I said without hesitating. I flinched at the harshness of my own voice. What was wrong with me? All this time, we never had any idea of where Mariana would be heading if she left the royal grounds, or where Vencal was, and now suddenly they were going to be at the same camp at the same time. You think they're meeting at another camp? Or not leaving the royal grounds at all? I wouldn't put it past Vencal to dangle his queen in front of us just to lure us out of hiding. Hell, for all we know, he wants us to go after her to get her killed, and then he'll move in on the rest of us. Jig gave me a sympathetic look. We're breaking them down, we are. We just have to keep being patient. Their time will come. Not soon enough. Without the antidote, Iona would die. There was no more denying that truth. She would die unless we acted. Why did everything have to be so damned complicated? How sure are our spies about this intel? No, Henson stated as he marched toward me. Don't even think about it. If I have to put a guard on you, then I will. You are not leaving Timber Falls alone. Why not? Just let me go and check it out. If they're there, I can contact you and you can bring in the forces. And what do you think Iona will say? I'd say I should go instead, Iona's voice sounded from the stairs. I rushed her as she reached the main floor. Her eyes were clearer, thanks to the drops I made for her months ago and still had in my stores. She was pale though, and her skin clammy. You shouldn't be up. I slept long enough. And I should be the one to go. You need to stay here and rest, Henson argued. We'll send someone, I promise, but it won't be either of you. It should be me. Iona squeezed my hand for support as she walked to Henson. I'm the one already dying, remember? Iona, I scolded, but she shook her head. If I can't get the antidote soon, I'm dead. We all know it. I'm not giving up the faith, she said, when I opened my mouth to try and talk her out of it. I'm being realistic. Tell me I'm wrong, Aiden. Tell me that I'm going to be fine. I tucked her messy hair behind her ears. You are. And you're lying. Let me go. That's exactly what they want. They're hunting for you, Jig reminded her. The second they see your face. They'll what? Kill me, she cut him off. They already are. Slowly. Her words tore through me, and Jig cursed, then backed away as if he couldn't bear to accept the truth either. Henson's eyes took on a calculating look, and then he was nodding slowly. How about a compromise? Give us a chance to figure out if this intel is for real or not. If it is, you can come with us, but you are not going in alone to find out. We wait. For how long, huh? She asked. As long as we can. Please. Trust us. Iona sighed, then sank into the couch, all her energy gone. I always have. I tilted my head at Henson. He subtly shook his, and I inwardly breathed a sigh of relief. Even when they found out for certain, he wasn't going to let Iona go. She was in too weak of a state to fight against Vencal, or whoever V was. I would not watch either of them kill her. I'd go in her place, and she would remain here. Safe and alive, for as long as I could keep her that way. Henson and Jig started for the door when they paused. Aiden, Xavier wanted to double-check that the clinic was stocked. Do you mind doing it now? I hesitated, but Iona smiled at me and gave me an ineffective attempt at a shove. The three of us held our breaths, and I could tell we're trying not to notice how frail she'd become. Take him. Otherwise, he's just going to sit here and worry over me. I'm fine. I can see, and I promise I won't wander outside. I followed them out and shut the front door against the cold. The walk through the snow to the clinic was slow, but not because of the weather. All I saw was Iona's eyes clouded over forever, and her permanently unable to feel anything. By the time we reached the clinic and stepped in out of the cold, I wanted to turn around and rush right back to her. But I had a job to do. Aiden, Jig said as he flipped on the lights for me, there's something else we haven't told you yet. I didn't want to say it in front of Iona. Not when she can't fight. What else is wrong? Have they found us out? Henson sat down heavily in one of plastic chairs in the waiting area. About a month ago, Raysan's forces crossed over the border from Jolian into Brier. They attacked a town and killed everyone there, burned it to the ground. 5 goblins, everyone. How did we not hear about this? I asked, alarmed. Xavier kept it quiet. Princess Willow, along with the king and queen of Brier, confronted Raysan about it, but he blamed it on random terrorists because of our revolution, Jig said disgustedly. Of course, they didn't buy it, but Xavier went to see the leaders of Brier in secret. And for the last 3 weeks, Brier has been preparing for an assault on Jolian's capital, Henson said. They'll be marching out in 3 days' time. Why does no one else here know? This is great news. Because there have been a few times over the last few months where our plans have gone askew. Xavier didn't want the wrong people to get wind of what Brier's planning. Which is also why we don't want Iona running off to that camp when we need to turn our attentions to Jolien if Brier calls for aid. Henson glanced at the door as if expecting to find Iona eavesdropping, but thankfully she'd remained at the farmhouse. The best way Iona can help now is to stay out of the way. She won't like it, but we will capture Vencal. We'll get the antidote in time. I'm only asking for a few more days. So you want me to keep her distracted? I think she might notice if half of Timber Falls clears out, I muttered. Do your best, that's all we can ask. I told them I would, then asked if Xavier really wanted me to inventory the clinic. Jig and Henson shook their heads, patted me on the shoulder, and said to have a good night. They left me alone with my thoughts. Relief flooded me for a few brief seconds. Finally, one of the Light Phi kingdoms had reason enough to attack the Dark Phi. We weren't going to be fighting this war alone much longer. Keeping Iona busy was going to be a challenge, but I'd find a way to do it. This war might be over far sooner than we expected. The idea of not having to fight anymore had me rushing to finish up at the clinic and head back to the farmhouse. I reminded myself not to look too excited when I walked inside, but didn't need to worry about it. Iona was passed out on the couch. She was curled up in such a tiny ball, it was hard to believe she was one of the fiercest fighters in the Dark Phi kingdoms. I shrugged out of my coat, kicked off my boots, and picked her up. She stirred in my arms but didn't awaken. Once we were upstairs, I tucked her under the covers and climbed in beside her. Soon we'd have the antidote, and the war would end. I fell asleep with the notion that unless something went terribly wrong, our revolution would not claim Iona's life. I woke up confused and in an empty bed. Pale sunlight streamed through the windows, the sky pink from the sun rising over the horizon. Where Iona had been was cold. I sat up and threw the blankets aside. Iona. There was no answer. Heart pounding, I rushed out of the bedroom and searched every inch of the house. When I checked the closet where Iona stored her gear, I slammed the door shut with a furious yell. Her daggers, her coat boots, and her holster with a pistol were gone. She hadn't even left a note, but she didn't need to. I knew exactly where she'd gone. Why couldn't she have just waited? Cursing as I tugged on my boots and ran out of the farmhouse to alert the others, I mentally kicked myself. I knew I should have just told her about the attack Brier planned. If she knew, she might not have felt the need to go after Vencal alone. She wouldn't be walking into a trap right now. She had to know that's what it was, and yet she went anyway because she was desperate, so desperate she was willing to do something incredibly risky and stupid. Why hadn't I seen past the promise she gave us all last night? Aiden. Jig blurted as I burst through the doors of the armory to find him, Henson, and Xavier there. Iona's gone.
Chapter 9. Iona. The drops burned as I let them fall into my eyes. I bit back a curse and waited for the stinging to cease. I'd left an hour after Aiden had fallen asleep. I understood his need to protect me, but he would never appreciate the crippling fear torturing me at the notion of becoming permanently blind, of losing everything that made me who I was, of finally succumbing to the poison and dying before I had a chance to get vengeance. Was it a trap? I had no doubt it was, but the encampment at Dagger Mountain was small compared to the others. Though it would be heavily protected, I was quite skilled at getting in and out of places. Without Aiden tagging along, he couldn't be used against me. I'd find Vencal, take the antidote, and get out of here before anyone spotted me. That's what I told myself I came here to do. Just get the antidote. Mariana's death would have to wait. I could live with that if I knew I was going to live. I'd beg forgiveness from Aiden once I made it back to Timber Falls. And I wasn't completely irresponsible about it. I had a calm in my ear, ready to turn on after I made it into the camp. If I ran into trouble, Jig or Henson would know. I doubted they'd get to me in time, but was hoping my plan did not go wrong. I was only a mile or so from the encampment. Once the stinging from the eye drops finally stopped distracting me, I set off through the trees. The sudden cold snap lingered, but the venom kept me from feeling the frigid air against my face and hands. Voices met my ears before I laid eyes on the camp. I hunkered down as I made my way to the perimeter. The southern side of the camp was guarded by 4 Phi soldiers. There was no sign of Mariana's guard detail. Or Vencal, but I couldn't see much through the trees full of dark green leaves and a layer of fresh snow. I watched the guards for a few minutes, debating how to distract them from their post when one of them pressed his finger to his ear and turned to his comrade. Afterward he nodded and waved to the guards posted there. To the front, the Phi ordered. Let's go. The VIPs are here. Shut the gate and lock it. The Phi backed away from the entrance, and a heavy metal gate slid shut with a clang. The Phi locked it with 3 deadbolts, then walked away. I waited to see any hint of warding or magic, but the soldiers must not be fighters. They left it as it was, locked. I smirked until a sharp pain stabbed my chest, and breathing suddenly became difficult. I dug my claws into the mud, doubled over and heaved. Black bile fell from my lips, splattering my boots. The pain intensified, and I bit back a shriek as I threw myself into the shadows of the trees. My back arched as my body convulsed in a wave of agony, burning through my very bones. I gasped when it finally subsided, collapsed to the ground, shaking and seeing double. I didn't have weeks to live. Shit, I might not even have days. The Reaper venom was coming back to kill me with a vengeance. I struggled to roll over and get to my hands and knees. The Phi guard said the VIPs were there. Vencal had to be among them. I crawled until I was finally able to get my feet under me and made it to the fence. I spotted an opening between 2 red tents, and no sign of any guards. Taking a chance, I climbed up and over the fence, dropped lightly to my feet and rushed to get under cover. There was a watchtower several yards to my right, and I headed for it, dagger in hand. A single Phi stood guard at the steps. I latched onto his back as I rammed my dagger into his throat, and clamped my hand over his mouth to muffle his scream. His body slumped to the ground, and I shoved it aside, then silently climbed the wooden steps to the watchtower. 2 Phi stood against the railing, their backs to the stairs. I stayed on the steps, drew my second dagger and sliced their calves. Both men crashed to the floorboards, and I snatched a rifle from one to butt the other in the face. He rolled to the side with a grunt, and I pressed the rifle against the first Phi's throat. He pushed to get Met off, but I smashed him in the face, then buried my dagger in his ribs. The second Phi rolled back toward me, ready to attack when I threw myself at him, burying my other dagger in his skull. Seconds ticked by, but no guards came running up to the top of the tower. I retrieved my daggers, then gingerly stepped over the dead Phi to the railing. From where I stood, I had a perfect vantage point of the front gate, which was illuminated by lights since the sun hadn't risen yet. A convoy of armored trucks pulled through, and as the driver's side door opened on the first one, I snarled. Vencal. The bastard was here, after all. More doors opened, and several Phi I didn't recognize stepped out, dressed in the finery of advisors and royals. They must have been the ones from across the pond. Vencal shook hands and smiled like he was about to be greatly rewarded for bringing them all here. Then he turned to the vehicle he exited, and opened the rear passenger door. V climbed out first, hair tugged back in a bun and heavily armed. Right behind her was Queen Mariana. I sheathed my dagger, and had my hand halfway to my holster when I stopped myself with a quiet curse. The chances of hitting Mariana from this distance with my pistol were slim. The entire camp would go into a frenzy, and I'd be dead. Mariana could wait. She had to wait. Vencal and Mariana stayed with the other VIPs, until Vencal broke away and headed deeper into the camp. My gaze remained on him as he wove his way through the tents and entered one near the rear fence. It was black and unguarded. I traced a path to get there that with any luck wouldn't let me be seen. There was no time to turn back. Another sharp pain threatened to rip through my gut. I gripped the railing, breathing in and out carefully as I willed the pain to subside. When it passed, I was left drenched in a cold sweat and barely able to stand up straight. I had a job to do, and I wasn't leaving until I did it. The others, though, they had to know that our targets were here. I turned on the comm attached to my belt, then pressed my finger to the earwig. Fighter 7 to TF, anyone copy? Static met my words. I repeated myself 2 more times, until there was a muffled curse and a familiar voice I did not expect to hear in my ear. Iona, where the hell are you? Aiden snapped, sounding worried as hell. I gritted my teeth against the echo of pain from the last fit. I couldn't sit around and wait. I'm sorry. I only came for Vencal. Do not go in there alone. Got it? Don't. I heard more voices, then the rumble of engines in the background. Where are you? On our way to you. Do not go in there. We'll get Vencal together, but you're too weak to take him on alone. Please, I'm begging you, just wait for us, all right? Iona? I can't. Don't do this. He'll kill you, damn it. The antidote was in that tent with Vencal. They were both so close. I hung my head as Aiden continued to yell and try to talk me out of it, but when I sensed another fit coming on, my resolve strengthened, and I squared my shoulders to face my fate alone. I'm sorry, I said again. No, Iona. Make sure the others know that bitch is here, I talked over him. Mariana, the advisors and the VIPs from the other Dark Phi kingdoms. They're all here. I'll see you soon, Aiden. He yelled my name one more time when I cut the connection and shoved the comm in my pocket. There was no more time to waste, but I had to wait for the next fit to pass so as not to tumble down the stairs of the watchtower. Wiping black mucus from my lips, I held my daggers in hand and trekked down the steps. The path to reach Vencal was burned in my mind. I stuck to it, stumbling over my feet once or twice and nearly falling into a patrol standing only feet away. By the time I reached Vencal's tent, sweat soaked my clothes, which then turned icy cold in the freezing temperatures. A bit of feeling was coming to me every now and again, enough to tell me I should be shivering my ass off by now. Adrenaline or the venom stopped it from getting to me. I pushed on. Once I was around the back of the tent, I dug the tip of my dagger into the heavy canvas and gave a slight tug, just enough to create a peephole. Vencal was alone inside the tent. He was bent over a table in the center, muttering to himself. His long white coat was draped over a chair nearby, revealing a shoulder holster holding several knives. I wondered if any of them were dipped in Reaper venom. Would a second dose of the toxin kill me instantly? Aiden's pleading voice for me to wait came to me again, but there was no more time. I would die unless I got that antidote. The sun had risen, but it did little to brighten the morning. Heavy cloud cover quickly blocked out whatever warmth the sun might have provided. Creating the tiniest of flames on my daggers, I singed through the canvas agonizingly slow and made an opening just large enough to slip through. I readied my blades to hold him captive until he gave me what I wanted. Vencal straightened. I paused, but he didn't turn around. He held something in his hand, a watch I thought but wasn't sure. 5 feet now, then 2, then finally I lunged forward without a sound and held the tip of one dagger beneath his ribs as I placed the other at his throat. His body stilled, and he held up his hands as a sneer spread across his face. My, this certainly is a surprise. Iona, my sweet, how good of you to visit. Shut it, I snapped and dug the tip of the dagger through his skin until I saw blood stain his clean white shirt. The antidote. Where is it? How many friends did you bring with you today? I'm not playing your games. The antidote. Give it to me, and I'll make your death quick. Ah, unlike your death, you mean? His narrowed eyes peered at me over his shoulder. I am amazed that you've lasted this long. Tell me, how does it feel to have poison burning through your body day after day? Does it hurt? Are you slowly losing your mind? I spun him around and slammed him into the table, then crossed my flaming daggers across his neck as I glared. He clicked his tongue as if he was disappointed in me. I kept my ears tuned to the noises outside, waiting for a troop of guards to come rushing in, but no one came. Maybe this wasn't a trap, after all. That didn't seem likely, and I told myself to hurry up and get out of there. Vencal's gaze turned quizzical, then his eyes widened as if he was admiring his latest and greatest work. "Not feeling too good today, are we?" I snarled and bared my sharpened canines at him. "Which body part would you like to lose first?" "I won't be the one losing anything today, my sweet Iona. But I am going to give you this one-time offer." He stood to his full height, or tried to, until I pressed my blade against his neck. He winced and his gaze darkened. "I will give you the antidote if you join us. You are one of the best. Everyone knows that. Join me, fight by my side. You'll never reach your full potential otherwise." "I don't think the rest of Charus would agree with your decision, since they all believe I murdered Jarek," I pointed out. "We can change that." I pulled one hand away, just long enough to nail him in the face with the hilt of the blade. His head flew back and he sputtered curses as blood spurted from his nose. "Antidote now, Vencal. I won't ask you again." My hands trembled, and the second he spotted it, he grinned and cackled like the madman he was. "You are quite literally out of time. That is a shame." I drew back my fist to hit him again, when the hard end of a gun barrel pressed into the side of my head. My lip twitched as I glanced to the side to find V, that damned blonde fly always getting in my way. "Drop the daggers and back away. Do it now." "I do as she says," Vencal whispered. "She has quite the trigger finger." I ground my teeth. How had I not heard her come in? I backed away from Vencal, then as I went to lower my hands, spun around and drove my dagger through her forearm. She grunted in pain, but held onto the pistol. I shoved her arm to the side as she fired off a shot that went wide, then bashed her in the nose with my forehead. I brought my boot up and nailed her in the gut, then took the stabbed arm and flipped her over my head, working to dislodge the gun. She landed on her back, and just as I was about to stomp on her hand, a wave of dizziness hit me, and my vision became blurred with black spots. It felt like someone stabbed me in the lungs, but there was no wound. My breathing grew raspy, and then I was on my knees gagging on thick black bile. Vencal crowed as he watched. He kicked me in the face as my limbs seized. The daggers fell from my palms. I've never seen someone reach such a stage of pure agony. "By the gods, Iona, you should have just let it kill you all those months ago." "Go to hell," I gasped, until a jolt like someone stuck my hand in a light socket had my back arching off the ground as I screamed. Vencal continued to grin when V appeared over me. She raised the pistol in her other hand, and whacked me across the face with it, plunging me into darkness. At least in the dark, there was no pain. "Is she alone?" I grimaced at how loud Mariana's voice was, unsure of how long I'd been knocked out. Long enough to be picked up and tied to a chair. I shook my head as my eyes opened to find the Queen standing in front of me, with Vencal and V at her side. "My men are scouring the camp," Vencal told her. "So far, she appears to have come alone." "You said this trap would lure them all in," Mariana snapped. "I thought it would, but I believe Iona is trying to be the hero." He gave me a wicked grin when he realized I was conscious again. "Well, now there's some strength left in you after all. I was worried that we might have finished you off." I tugged on my wrists. Except they were tied tight behind my back. I settled for spitting at him instead. He rested his hands on my thighs as he leaned into my face, forcing me to look into his cold, heartless eyes. "It's a shame you have to die, Iona. I hope you understand it hurts me physically to see you like this. Truly it does." "Shut up and finish her off," Mariana ordered, not even looking at me. Vencal shrugged and pulled back. "If you give it a few hours, you can watch her die slowly and painfully. Or you can do as I say and kill her now. You must remember, Vencal, I'm the queen here, not you. I am in charge of this entire operation, this kingdom and Jolien. Do not make me question where your loyalties lie." Vencal gave her a sweeping bow. She didn't seem to understand was to mock her. "Of course, Your Grace. My apologies. She has cost me quite enough in troops and supplies. I want you to end her." I could, Vencal said, and Mariana scowled at him, but don't you want to do it yourself? A queen does not stain her hands with blood if she can help it. I couldn't stop myself. I laughed. Seriously? You bitch. You might not have been the one to stab your brother, but his blood is all over your hands. The slap caught me off guard. I didn't know Mariana could move that fast and in a dress. Don't you dare mention my brother to me. Why not? You had him killed. She smacked me again as she shrieked in fury. I worked my jaw, but the pain of her slaps was pale in comparison to what the venom was doing to me now. Or is it finally getting to you that you're killing off a good chunk of your subjects? And for what? To take over and rule? You and I both know the other kingdoms will never respect you, as they did Jarek. And the goblins. Oh, the goblins will start an uprising the likes of which you've never seen, I warned. The entire world will know what you've done, and not even Vencal or his little bitch here will be able to keep you safe. Mariana screamed as she took the pistol from V and aimed it at my forehead. One more word and I'll do it. I'll kill you right now. I leaned forward as far as the ropes would allow me. Then do it. As he said, I'm dead anyway. I wished I could have had my hands free and was more than ready to keep fighting. The truth was, I was tired. So freaking tired. There was no strength left in my limbs, and my vision was steadily growing darker around the edges. Soon I wouldn't be able to see at all. I thought of Aiden as I stared down the barrel of the gun, waiting for Mariana to get up the nerve to take my life. Seeing him one last time would have been a nice way to leave this world. I closed my eyes and imagined our happily ever after. Standing on the porch of our new home. Together. When I breathed in deeply, I could have sworn I smelled his usual blend of fresh herbs and wood smoke, but that wasn't possible. Aiden wasn't here. Just as I was about to yell at Mariana to just get it over with, gunshots came from outside. What's happening? Mariana demanded, as Vencal rushed to the tent opening. Stay here, he snapped, nodding to V. You too. V didn't look happy, but said nothing. Vencal winked at me as if to say he'd be back to watch me die, then was gone. More gunshots blasted through the camp, followed by screams. Who was attacking? My mind raced, wondering what was going on, until I remembered hearing engines through the comm when I'd spoken to Aiden. He'd said they were on their way. I hadn't realized they were that close. A blast shook the ground beneath our feet as I stopped myself from smirking. Maybe Aiden was here after all, the idiot. If it was just him, Henson and Jig, they'd be outnumbered in seconds. I had to get out of this damn tent. My willingness to die was suddenly overwhelmed with the desperation to get out of this chair, find Aiden, and stop him from getting himself shot in the process of rescuing my ass. I worked at the ropes holding my wrists, fighting to free myself as V moved to the front of the tent and peered out. She was handicapped now, thanks to my initial attack. I might stand a chance against her. Mariana had the gun though, and she was on edge. I'd have to take her down first. The fighting's moving this way, V reported. We need to evacuate you, Your Grace. No. They couldn't get away, not again. I bit my lip as the ropes cut into my skin, but the knots held firm. Damn it. Of all times for me to be this weak, it had to be now. What about her? Mariana aimed the gun at me. V joined her queen's side. Shoot her for all I care. You're the queen, aren't you? Mariana nodded slowly as her grip tightened on the weapon. I am indeed. I opened my mouth to curse her out when a metal cylinder rolled into the tent. V threw Mariana to the side as smoke poured out of the canister and filled the tent. I coughed and gagged, struggling to see through the heavy haze. Hands found mine, then someone was sawing at the ropes to release me. Aiden? I whispered and he squeezed my wrist. My hands were free, then he was hauling me to my feet and through the tent. We were nearly there when a furious scream rent the air. A hand wrapped in my hair. I was torn from Aiden's side and thrown onto the table. V was coughing and squinting as she charged for me. She never made it. Aiden struck her across the back with a rifle, and when she whirled around on him, he fired. If the shot hit her, she didn't show it. She leapt on him. I moved to go help him when Mariana loomed out of the smoke, gun in hand. "You are not getting away," she seethed. A yelp of pain, feminine, so I knew it wasn't Aiden, told me he was holding his own. I lunged forward as she pulled the trigger. The shot narrowly missed my head, and then we were on the ground. I fought Mariana for the pistol. She scratched at my face, but it did nothing to stop my attack. Somewhere to my left, Aiden cursed, and then there was a gasp as if someone was stabbed. I chanced a glance to see who was still standing, when Mariana attempted to push the pistol back in my face. Iona. Aiden. He was alive, which meant V was dead, hopefully. I smashed Mariana's hand into the ground, forcing her to let go of the gun. Then it was in my hands, pointed right at her forehead. "You won't kill me," she said, trying to glare at me even as she radiated fear. "I'm queen of..." I squeezed the trigger. The gun recoiled as the shot went off. Mariana died with a shocked look on her face. "Queen of nothing now," I muttered as I slid off her and fell to my back. The gun slipped from my hand, and then Aiden was there, hovering over me. I tried to smile as I raised my hand to his face. "Hey, fancy meeting you here." His lips twitched, but he didn't smile. That was too bad. I really wanted to see him smile again. "Come on. We need to get you back home." "No," I said as he tried to sit me up, but it was too much. I gripped his arm, and then I was on my side, vomiting so much I thought there'd be nothing left in me. "It's over, Aiden. I missed my chance." Vencal. "Too late. It's too late." I gasped and curled in on myself. Feeling like my bones were melting inside my body, I fought to hold back a scream, but there was no stopping it. Aiden was saying my name and trying to hold me still. Then he was shouting for help and begging me to hold on. I cupped his cheek with my trembling hand and smiled one last time the best I could. "I love you." "No, Iona, don't you dare close your eyes." "Iona." The shadows that hovered at the edge of my vision moved in and took away my sight. Aiden's voice was muffled and growing fainter. I wanted to tell Aiden I was sorry. I never should have left the farmhouse. I might not have killed Vencal, but Mariana was dead. She was dead before me. I'd take that as a win.
Chapter 10. Aiden. I shook Iona's shoulders, but there was no response. Her pulse was barely there, and her breathing intermittent. She shuddered every few seconds. She was dying. I was too late. "Aiden," Henson yelled as he burst through the tent. "Gods, what happened?" "Iona killed Mariana," I told him, and nodded to the dead queen. "V is dead too." "And Iona?" he asked hesitantly. "Aiden, is she alive?" "Barely." "Where's Vencal?" I snapped. "We have to find him now, or she's going to die." Henson swung his rifle onto his shoulder, then wiped sweat and blood from his face. "I'm not sure, but he can't have gotten far. The camp's ours. The foreign advisors surrendered, and the ones from Charus are either dead or on the run. And the kingdom of Brier moved up their attack when we came here." Henson helped hold Iona down when another fit took hold of her body. She thrashed violently, then went utterly still. I frantically checked for a pulse. It was there, but I wasn't sure for how long. Henson was on his feet and bellowing for help. Who had eyes on Vencal? Jig arrived with Jolene and Gray on his heels. "He fled to the north," Jig replied, his eyes fixed on Iona. "Shit. Stay with them. I'm going to hunt down the bastard." "I'm coming with you," I said as I stood and picked up my rifle. "Aiden." I checked the rifle was loaded, then looked from Jig to Henson. "I'm going. You try to stop me, I'll shoot you." I didn't let myself look at Iona again. If I did, I might have stayed. Vencal needed to be found. The antidote was the only thing that would save Iona now. I rushed out of the tent and took off at a steady run through what remained of the encampment. Most of our forces had already moved out to join our army, heading for the next encampments. Xavier's plan was simple: push through the enemy, get to the capital, and end the war. With Mariana here and dead, though, I sensed the war was already over. The rest of the kingdom would figure it out soon enough. Not that I gave a shit. All that mattered was tracking down Vencal and saving Iona. Henson and I darted around trees as we set off into the woods. I wasn't much of a tracker, but Henson was. He guided us over terrain that grew steeper and rougher the further we ran. The only sound was the pounding of our boots and my harsh breathing. Henson stopped briefly to point out a footprint and several drops of blood. Looked like Vencal was wounded. Henson pressed his finger to the blood, then motioned for us to pick up the pace. We must have been close. When we reached a hollow, Henson paused. I skidded to a stop beside him as he glanced at the ground. "Shit," he muttered. "Lost the trail." "Find it," I ordered as I cast my eyes around the trees. I'd apologize to him later, but if he was angry about my attitude, he didn't show it. "Wait, Aiden, we need to." A figure dropped from the branches and onto Henson. The two men scuffled as I attempted to aim my rifle, but I couldn't get a clean shot. Henson's gun went off, nearly hitting my leg. Vencal hit him on the head with a rock. Henson went down, and Vencal whirled around to face me. His white clothes were covered in mud, soot, and blood. The mad look in his eyes was like a rabid beast's. His lips twitched, and the cackle that emanated sent a chill down my spine. I leveled my gun at him, but he didn't stop. "The antidote." "Hand it over," I demanded. He took another step, then another. I shot at him, purposely missing to try and make him see that I was serious, but he kept coming. I readied another shot, but he pitched the rock at my face. It smashed into my cheek as I turned to avoid it, and then he was on me. I pulled the trigger again and thought the shot might have hit him. Then suddenly the gun was yanked out of my grasp. Vencal tossed it down the hill and then came at me with a boulder. I dodged to the right, and the stone slammed into the dirt by my head. "What do you see in her, huh?" he asked as he raised his hand to strike me. I caught his wrist, straining to shove him off, but he was too strong. I lost my grip, and the rock caught my cheek. I cursed at the stinging pain of it scraping off my skin. Iona's voice shouted in my ear to get my ass off the ground and fight back. Vencal was howling with maddening laughter when I managed to get my boot beneath his body and kicked with everything I had. He moved enough for me to slide out from under him and scramble away. "You know she's going to be dead by the time you get back," he said as he climbed to his feet and we squared off. "If you make it back." I wiped the blood from my cheek and said nothing in reply. "You're just a healer. You won't win this fight. It's best if you walk away." He grunted and held his free hand to his right side. Blood seeped around his fingers. "Looks like you're the one that won't win," I said, nodding to his wound. "You're going to bleed to death in a few minutes unless you take care of that wound." It wasn't true. The bleeding was steady, but that wound wouldn't kill him quickly. He'd stay alive for a while. Vencal glanced at it and shrugged. "I'll live long enough to ensure you can't save her. She might be breathing her last this very second, choking on black bile as the poison eats her from the inside out, destroying her." He cracked a wicked smile as my hands curled into fists. "The agony she must be in. Definitely not a pleasant death." I felt Iona convulsing in my arms again, heard her gasping for air as if she was right there beside me. Dying. I bellowed at the physical pain and contemplating losing her, then I charged forward blindly. His fist collided with my face, making me stumble back. I blocked the second punch with my arm, but the third clocked me under the jaw and sent me reeling. The taste of blood filled my mouth. It was all I could do to try and ward off every hit. I gasped when he nailed me in the gut, then struck me in the spine, knocking me to the ground. He kicked me in the ribs until at least one was broken. When his boot crashed into my face, I was flipped onto my back and left staring up at the swaying tree branches until his evil glare blocked my view. He pressed me into the mud with his boot, then crouched over me with a small dagger in his hand. The blade was thin and narrow, nothing like the daggers Iona fought with. When he tilted it, the faint sunlight fighting to break through the clouds caught a lime green sheen. Reaper venom. I caught his wrist as he aimed to plunge that knife into my chest. He laughed as he easily pushed against me until the tip of that dagger was inches from my skin. "It's fitting you should go out the way she did," he said casually. "Dying from the one poison you couldn't save her from. All circles around, doesn't it? Funny how it works that way." He leaned forward, and I winced when the tip of the blade pricked my skin. "Oh, come now. You're going to need a heavier dose than that to die today." All my life, I waited to find my true calling. Not just being a healer, but my purpose. The moment Iona came into my life, I knew she was it. She was the reason I'd been put on this earth. I could not fail her now, but no matter how hard I pushed back against Vencal, I wasn't strong enough to defeat him. In the end, I was too weak, just as my family said I would be. Vencal continued to sneer as if sensing my defeat. A bright flash of light lit up his face. He glanced behind me, and the blood drained from his face. "You," he breathed. "You can't be here." His eyes widened, and a crazed laugh escaped him as he backed away from me, the knife clutched in his hand. "You stay away from me. All of you just stay away." I rolled over and sat up to find not just one spirit filling the hollow, but too many to count. Their bodies faded in and out, but they were there, and the hatred emanating from them stole the breath from my lungs. At the head of the group was Jarek, his face scrunched up in fury. He stepped closer. The rest of the spirits following his lead. Vencal spun around slowly as the spirits that surrounded him, cutting off any chance he had of escape. "His victims," I whispered, and didn't need a spoken confirmation. Vencal's terrified look was enough to tell me I was right. "You're dead. You're all dead. Just stay back," Vencal shouted. Two of the spirits lunged forward, their hands extended as if to drag him away to the afterlife. He swatted wildly at them with his dagger, but he'd already done as much damage as he could to them. More went after him. He spun around, fell down, then scurried to get back to his feet. Jarek glided to me, then shifted his gaze as if to ask what I was waiting for. I nodded, and together we stalked toward Vencal, the bastard who tried to kill the woman we both loved. I dove through Jarek's shimmering form and snatched the knife from Vencal's hand. Without hesitating, I stabbed him in the chest with his own poison blade. The spirits in the hollow stopped torturing him and watched as Vencal staggered a few steps, then glanced down at his chest. "It's time you pay for your sins," I said as I reached for another knife sheathed at his side. He weakly held up his hand to ward me off, but I rammed the second one in. He fell into me, and I took the last two knives. It was like someone else was in control of my hands as I raised both knives and with one final shout of rage, buried them in Vencal's back. "For Iona," I whispered, but the voice that came out of my mouth wasn't mine. As Vencal hit his knees, I shuddered, and Jarek stepped out of my body. He glowered at the dying man, then nodded to me. A weird coldness spread through my limbs. The sensation lingered until Jarek and the other spirits vanished. Vencal gasped and grabbed at the ground. Then he fumbled at a chain hanging around his neck. When he lifted up a long, thin vial with a dark violet liquid inside, I snatched it away, snapping the chain at his neck. "No, please," he begged, crawling toward me for it. I kicked at his outstretched hand, spat at the ground by him in disgust, then turned my back. He continued to plead, calling out for mercy, but I had nothing to give him. With the antidote clutched in hand, I hurried to Henson. He groaned, then bolted upright. "Vencal," he exclaimed until he heard the Phi's hollow breathing behind me. "Did you poison him?" "He had it coming," I replied darkly. Remembering I'd been pricked with one of those poison blades during the fight, I undid the stopper of the vial as gently as I could and barely pressed it to my lips. One tiny drop was enough to make me gnash my teeth and dig my nails into Henson's shoulder until the sensation passed. "What the hell?" he asked, staring at my neck. I pressed my fingers to the small wound to find a lime-green sludge. "Reaper venom. The antidote works. You have it." I put the stopper back in the vial and nodded. Iona. We helped each other to our feet, then fled down the hillside, leaving Vencal's dying shouts behind. The second we stepped foot into the camp, the somberness that greeted us halted me on the spot. Jig, Gray, and Jolene stood in a circle, their heads hanging. On the ground in front of them was a figure out on a blanket. "No," I gasped, then shouted as I sprinted to Iona's side. I shoved my way through them and ignored their calls as I knelt. Iona's eyes were closed and her body still, too damned still. There was blood mixed with a black sludge dotting her lips. Her skin was cold, and as I checked her wrist for a pulse, then her neck, reality sank in. I was too late. "Aiden, I'm sorry," Jig said as he rested a heavy hand on my shoulder. "When?" I forced out. "When, damn it?" "Minutes ago," he replied. I smoothed the hair back from Iona's forehead and pressed my lips there. Tears burned in my eyes, but a voice in my head said it wasn't over, not yet. I wasn't sure what it meant. Iona was dead. The proof was right there in front of me. The same strange cold sensation flooded my body, and then my hands were moving on their own. They shimmered in and out of view as those around me gasped. My hands rested on either side of Iona's head, without my putting them there. I had no idea what was happening until Jarek's voice whispered in my mind. "Her soul is still here. I feel it. You're not too late, Aiden." Then Jarek left me, and I was sucking in air, trying not to pass out from being taken over twice in such a short amount of time. "Prop her up," I told Henson as I clutched the vial in my hand and loosened the stopper. "Aiden," Henson argued quietly, but I glowered at him until he gave in. He sat Iona up, and I carefully tilted her head back. "You really think this will work?" "I do." I ignored his curious and slightly worried look and focused on Iona. I parted her lips and poured the entire contents of the vial down her throat, massaging it to work the muscles so she'd swallow it. "Come on," I whispered, holding her wrist in my hand and waiting to feel the steady beat of her heart. "I know you're in there. You can't die. Not yet." The fighters shifted uneasily around me, everyone waiting for a miracle to happen. Henson gave me a sympathetic look and opened his mouth, probably to tell me to let her go when Iona's hand twitched. We looked at it intently as I willed her to move again, to breathe, do something. Her fingers moved and then her whole arm. Henson braced her against his chest as I placed my fingers to her neck. 30 seconds went by until I felt a thud. Just one. 30 seconds later, there was another, then another, only 20 after that. "That's it," I told Iona. "Come back to me. Come back." Her lips parted, and she sucked in a harsh breath. She let it out, then her eyes flew open. They weren't clear, not yet. She turned to the side and vomited a lime-green sludge, her heaving racked her body. Her dark eyes cleared of any remaining fog. She squeezed my hand hard. When she finished spewing out the venom that had tortured her for months, she collapsed into my arms, shaking. And alive. Iona was alive. "Aiden." She peered up at me, confused. "Am I dead? Don't tell me you died too." I laughed quietly as I kissed the top of her head. "No, I'm not dead. And you were dead, technically speaking." She glanced down at herself, then around at everyone's faces, a mix of grins and disbelief. "Huh. Huh. That's all you have to say, huh?" Henson grated. "Woman, you're not allowed to scare any of us like that again, you hear me?" Yeah, she mumbled in reply. "He's right," I told her sternly. "Never again." She gave me a crooked grin. "Something tells me there's a damned good story to go along with how you just saved my life." "There is, but right now, you need to sleep. No arguing with me." Her eyes slipped closed, and she curled against my chest. "Whatever you say." I leaned in the doorway of our bedroom at the farmhouse. Iona had been sleeping for 2 days straight after getting the antidote. I, however, had hardly slept a wink. Hard to, when I was worried she was going to slip away from me somehow. She rolled over in her sleep with a relaxed smile on her face. Whatever she dreamt about must be good. Henson and Jig were downstairs talking quietly. They'd come to update me on the revolution and what was left of the cleanup. After I told them Iona had snuck out of Timber Falls, I'd expected the three of us to go after her. Xavier had rallied our entire fighting force, as well as called in the fighters he had hiding out in other locations. We lost less than I anticipated taking over the encampment at Dagger Mountain, but that one move had changed the course of the war. Mariana was dead. The foreign dignitaries were called out for attempting to align themselves with her plots to attack the Light Phi kingdoms. Mariana's advisors, those who hadn't been killed or arrested yet, were in the process of being hunted down. Those who had been loyal to the Queen were finally given access to the truth. Many hadn't even realized how horrifying her crimes against the goblins were. The people were also made well aware of who really killed King Jarek, clearing Iona's name once and for all. The capital of Charuz was currently under siege. According to the reports Jig brought, it wouldn't last the week. The remaining of Mariana and Vencal's men were holed up at the royal grounds with no way to escape. Not as if they'd be receiving help from King Rayson anytime soon. His palace was also currently under siege, thanks to Brier. The last I heard, the kingdoms of Honeysuckle and Evergreen had stepped in to aid in their ally. The war was indeed coming to an end. Creating a new government and rebuilding would take time, but at least that was something we had now. Time. Unable to stay away from her, I entered the bedroom and lay down beside Iona, trying not to disturb her. "Hey," she murmured as her eyes opened, clear of any fog. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Better than I have in a long while." "You should after sleeping 2 days," I teased, then held her as close as I could. "I thought I lost you there." It was strange. I knew I was dead, but I told myself not to go anywhere, so I stayed in this weird suspended place between light and dark. Her gaze turned thoughtful as she looked up at me. "I think Jarek was there. If he wasn't with you, he definitely was with me." "Really?" "I'll tell you all about it later. You're still resting." She sighed but didn't argue. "Aiden. What happened to Vencal?" "Dead by now, I'd assume." "You killed him?" I nodded. "Good. I hope the bastard suffered." Remembering the hefty dose of the poison I gave him, I knew for certain he did. Iona's breathing steadied, and I wondered if she'd drifted off to sleep. There was a question I'd been tossing around for the last 2 days, since bringing her home. Not sure if she would hear me or not, I whispered in her ear, "Marry me." She scooted further up the bed until her lips found mine. I took that as a yes, kissed her back, then tucked her beneath the blankets. I shut my eyes, and finally let myself fall asleep with the woman I loved safe in my arms, and the war we feared would claim us both finally coming to an end.
Chapter 11. Iona. 1 year later. My bare feet relished the soft grass beneath them, as I made my way down the path to where the mailbox stood near the old dirt road. A warm breeze rustled the branches budding and growing heavy with new leaves of spring. I breathed in air tinged with the sweetness of fresh flowers from the garden and the wood surrounding the cabin. A cold nose pushed against the palm of my hand, and I absently scratched the head of fur it was attached to. "What do you think, Boomer?" I asked the mutt who stood by my side, tail wagging. "Think it's a good day." He barked in agreement, and then trotted off into the trees. Crazy dog. I watched his fluffy tail dart around tree trunks and bushes as he gave chase to whatever small rodents were unlucky enough to be in his path. I checked the mailbox and pulled out the envelopes inside. There was a letter from Tennyson, addressed to Aiden. I tucked that one to the back of the stack as I started back toward the cabin. Another letter was from Willow. That was addressed to us both, and I decided to wait to open that one as well. The third letter was solely for me and came from the official council of Charuz. I groaned as I paused on the path to rip open the heavy paper. We'd been getting updates from the capital ever since the fall. Rebuilding would take years, but the new council, made up of goblins, half-breeds, and Phi, had done a fine job of ruling so far. Laws had been adjusted to reflect the new kingdom we wanted to have, and an alliance had been forged with the Light Phi kingdoms. The guilds were also being reshaped, new masters chosen. Xavier had offered me the title of master, but being part of the guild again was the last thing on my mind. The letter was from Teresa, and it said the same thing all the other letters had for the last year. Ever since the fall of Mariana's regime, the new council for the Dark Phi Kingdom of Charuz and Jolien had been absorbed. Teresa and the rest of the new ruling council begged for Aiden and me to join them. Each month, we'd get a new letter with an offer enticing us to head to the capital. And every time we'd turn them down. We'd been dubbed heroes of the revolution, seeing as I killed Mariana and Aiden took care of Vencal. Neither of us wanted to keep being celebrated for what we did to free Charuz and Jolien. After Aiden gave me the antidote and brought me back from the brink of death, I'd hung up my daggers and turned away from the guild. I wanted nothing to do with politics or anything else where too much would be asked of me again. The path I'd chosen to walk with Aiden was peaceful now, and I was quite all right with that. I glanced at the ring of entwined silver, copper and bronze on my left hand and smiled. Never did I imagine I'd have a life this complete, and every day it just kept getting better. I folded Teresa's letter, making a mental note to simply call her and tell her that despite how much I loved her, I was not taking her offer to join the council. She'd given up on Aiden already. Besides, we had enough on our plates here. I whistled for Boomer, and he bounded through the trees, joining me on the path. Squealing laughter resounded through the woods, followed by Aiden's growling sounds as he pretended to be some monster or other. When I came around the bend in the path, the large two-story sprawling cabin built amongst the trees came into view. Aiden's once tiny garden had been expanded and stretched across the whole front of our home. Vines and ivies draped over the split-rail fences. Herbs bloomed, and the vegetables were all coming in nicely after the latest spring rains. I leaned on the top fence railing as 3 small goblins cackled and swung sticks around like swords playing with each other. 2 older ones trailed after them with bright smiles on their faces. Bringing up the rear was Aiden, still growling away, with a little girl goblin, Jenny, clinging to his back and laughing hysterically. "Iona!" she yelled when she saw me, and Aiden immediately turned my way. My heart warmed at the intense look of love in those light green eyes that reminded me so much of spring. He came my way with Jenny and leaned in for a kiss. "Ew," Jenny said as we pulled apart. "That's gross." "One day it won't be," I told her. "Got a few letters for you today." "All right, Munchkin, go get the others," Aiden said as he set her down on her feet. Jenny flung herself at me first, hugging my legs, then sprinted away after the other kids. I watched her go, waiting for the pang of sadness that usually followed. Only today, it wasn't there. "Hey, you okay?" Aiden lifted my chin and kissed me again. "Actually, I am. I think finally I've come to terms with it. How can I not, when we've got a bigger family than I ever pictured having?" He wrapped me in his arms and I breathed him in, all herbs and wood smoke like always. The antidote he'd taken from Vencal had saved me from the venom, but not after it did permanent damage. We learned we'd never be able to have kids of our own. I was wandering around the capital of Charuz one day, and came to the orphanage. There were so many kids in need of homes after the war. I'd rushed home to run the idea by Aiden, and he'd swept me up in a hug, fully embracing the idea. So now there was the 2 of us, Boomer and 6 kids. I grinned as the 5 older goblins came rushing back around the house, acting terrified of Jenny chasing them down. She stomped her little feet and roared as loud as she could. "You are a terrible influence," I told Aiden as he turned to face the kids. He rested his chin on my head, and I sensed him grinning. "Want to read your mail? Anything exciting?" "Nah, not really. Teresa is begging me to come back. Something from Willow and Tennyson. Nothing that can't wait until later." We stayed at the fence, content to watch the kids and Boomer play. The warm breeze shifted, and something told me to turn toward the trees. A shimmering figure came into focus. I froze. "Aiden," I whispered. "Look." When he tensed, I knew he saw it too. Standing beneath the shade of the trees with a joyful smile on his face was Jarek. The goblin kids ran right by him, and his eyes followed them. His gaze flicked back to us, then he faded away as the breeze picked up and swirled. It died down, and we were left in a comfortable stillness. "I'm going to guess that means job well done," Aiden said softly. "I guess it does." I slipped my hand into his and tugged him toward the cabin. We climbed the 5 steps to the porch, then sat on the swinging bench to watch the day go by. My head fell to his shoulder and I closed my eyes, completely relaxed. At least until all 6 kids charged the porch. A life of laughter and love was all I had now. It was all I ever wanted. Aiden captured me in his arms and kissed me as the kids made faces. He spun me around, and then we were off, running after our gaggle of goblins. Our family.
Thank you for listening. This has been a Ciara Graves book. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified of new releases.